That's right about your father's inheritance. Emily and I will take over all the remaining assets. My mother told me right after my father's funeral. To be honest, I had no intention of discussing the inheritance on the day my father passed away. However, Emily eagerly pushed the conversation forward with sparkling eyes. There's a will too. Look, Emily continued, proudly displaying the document. Just after Dad went to the hospital, Mom and I visited his room and had him write this. Dad immediately agreed to leave neither inheritance nor anything to you, sis. Dad did that? I asked, stunned. Yeah, he did, even though he always relied on you. I know it's harsh. It's pitiful for you, isn't it? But of course, Dad always found me more affable and favored me, Emily said smugly. No way, I started, but my mother cut in gleefully. You who have no job, we have no intention of giving you a single penny from the inheritance. We'll be enjoying a trip abroad, so prepare to leave this house by the time we return. Wait, how can I accept this? Why would such a thing happen? I tried to speak, but Mom and Emily retorted coldly. Be quiet. It's impossible for you to get anything from us now. Now that Dad's gone, we can finally act freely. Your role here is done, so leave immediately. All the sacrifices I'd made for Dad, all I'd done for him, and this was the result. How cruel. Giving everything for such an ungrateful father was pointless, even if I wished for their help. Now it's too late. Hearing those words, any remaining familial feelings toward my mother and Emily disappeared entirely. I couldn't accept what they said about my father, whom I deeply respected. Without expressing all I wanted to say to my mother and Emily, I calmly responded, I understand. I can't stay with you two any longer. I'll gladly leave. With that, I left my childhood home. My name is Ashley. I have a sister, Emily, who's 4 years younger than me. We're a family of 4 with our 2 parents. Emily's personality is similar to our mother's. She's affable but sometimes lazy. She often teases my father and me, who have more sincere personalities. Our mother, having a temperament like Emily's, felt especially fond of her. When we were children, it was evident she favored Emily over me. Whenever she met her friends, my mother would only take Emily with her, often leaving me at home. According to her, it's embarrassing to show plain and quiet Ashley to my friends. On the other hand, my mother was very proud of Emily, who was friendly and loved by everyone. Even with such a mother and sister, the reason I could live my days positively was because of my father. He valued my sincerity and loved Emily equally. I deeply appreciated and loved my father's fair attitude. Even after becoming an adult, the way my mother treated me remained unchanged. However, thanks to my father's presence, our household remained stable. But after my father retired at 65, an incident occurred at home. He tripped over a small step in the house and broke a bone. Although he tried hard with surgery and rehabilitation, his aging muscles didn't recover easily. As he spent more time bedridden and needed care, the dynamics at home changed. My mother and Emily became even colder toward him. Hey Mom, what do you think about this inn? Emily asked. Yeah, it looks good. The food seems delicious too. Maybe we should go with this one, my mother replied, looking at a guidebook. They chatted excitedly. What are you talking about? I asked. We're planning for a family trip, my mother answered with a hint of annoyance. But considering Dad's difficulty in moving around, isn't traveling difficult for him? I responded. Emily smiled and said, well, we're not thinking of bringing him in the first place. We plan to leave him at home. That's cruel. It would be hard for him if he's left alone. If Dad's not joining, I will stay home with him, I said. My mother and Emily just smiled at each other. Then my mother said, that's fine too. If that's the case, Emily and I will just go by ourselves. Whether you two come or not is up to you, but since it's a family trip, we'll be using money from Dad's bank account. A quick glance at the guidebook revealed they had chosen a room meant for just 2 people. It was clear they had never intended to bring either my father or me along. After that, my mother and Emily frequently went out by themselves, staying at high-quality inns and dining at reputed restaurants. It was as if neither my father nor I existed in the house. I kept an eye on their actions from a distance, trying to finish my work as quickly as possible to take care of my father. When I couldn't handle everything alone, I sought help from care services for tasks like bathing assistance or accompanying my father on short walks around the neighborhood. On days when I had to work overtime, I asked my mother and Emily to look after my father, but they avoided the responsibility. Ashley, I came to help with the bath, But is there no one at home today? Upon receiving this notification from the care service staff, I quickly called my mother and Emily. Despite having informed them of the staff's visit in advance, they had left my father alone and gone out. When they finally returned home, I confronted them, but there was no apology. The staff are professionals, right? It's okay even if we aren't there. Dad is an adult. He'll be fine being left alone. We don't want our time taken up caring for him like you do, they said, genuinely believing they were doing nothing wrong. I realized I couldn't rely on them and decided that taking care of my father was my responsibility. I juggled work and caregiving. The daily grind was far from easy, especially since neither my mother nor Emily showed any concern or understanding. My father's condition worsened as the days went by. He spent more time seated than walking and ate much less. As the 9th year of caring for my father approached, I became increasingly concerned about how frail he looked when I took him to the hospital. I was hit with a shocking diagnosis. Your father has advanced cancer. It can't be, I thought, realizing that we might not have much time left with him. Determined to support him in his final days, I quit my job to care for him full-time. I knew I had to tell my mother and Emily. The reactions were unexpected. When I informed them about his condition, my mother commented, "Really? He never drank or smoked. It's unfortunate that such a sincere person ended up with cancer." Emily, with a stunned expression, said, "I can't believe you'd give up your job to take care of Dad. I'd never make that choice." I thought they would be concerned about him, but they showed no signs of it at all. I was honestly surprised by their indifference, as if it was someone else's business. In the end, the two of them only visited him at the hospital for a short time and never really came to pay a proper visit. I supported him daily during his chemotherapy treatments. Despite our best efforts, we couldn't stop the cancer's progression, and half a year later, he passed away. The days after the diagnosis went by in a blur. Upon hearing of his death, my mother and Emily started a private discussion and left me to arrange the funeral on my own. They disappeared somewhere, leaving me with no time to mourn my father, as I had to handle the funeral arrangements alone. As the funeral began, my mother appeared and began to deliver the chief mourner's speech. Despite having done nothing, she put on a face for the public. I was irritated by her behavior, but the funeral proceeded smoothly. Worn out as I headed home, I was invited to the living room by my mother and Emily, who had already returned, saying they had something to discuss. Without any consideration for my exhaustion, my mother abruptly declared, "Regarding your father's inheritance, Emily and I will inherit this house and all other assets." Frankly, I wasn't in the mood to discuss inheritance on the very day my father passed away. However, Emily eagerly chimed in, "We even have a proper will. Look," she proudly presented a document and began to explain. "Right after Dad was admitted to the hospital, Mom and I visited him and had him sign this. It states that you won't inherit anything." Dad agreed to it immediately. "Dad did?" I asked in disbelief. With a smirk, Emily said, "After all the help you provided, it's so cold, right? Maybe Dad in the end preferred me over his too serious elder daughter." "That's impossible," I began, but my mother interrupted with an inappropriate grin. "Clearly Emily is more adorable. Though your father always stayed home and had no hobbies, he surely saved a lot. Mom even quit her job because of the inheritance, and I took some time off work to enjoy it for a while," Emily added. Before I could respond, the two of them continued their conversation. My mother then told me, "You, who have no job, won't get a penny from the inheritance. We plan to enjoy a vacation abroad for a while, so you should leave this place by then," my mother declared. I hurriedly countered, "Wait a minute, do you genuinely believe what you're doing is right? If that's the case..." Without waiting for me to finish, both my mother and Emily firmly responded, "Shut your mouth. It's a waste of time trying to take the inheritance from us. With your father gone, we'll do as we please. Your role here is done. Please leave this house promptly." To think that after all I sacrificed for Dad, this is what I get. There was no need to go to such lengths for such an inept father. It's pointless to regret and think about it now. Hearing those words, any remaining bond I felt for my mother and Emily was completely severed. I couldn't forgive them for speaking that way about my beloved father. Holding back what I wanted to say, I calmly told them, "I understand your thoughts. From now on, I can't imagine living together with you two. I'll gladly leave." Despite their initial surprise at my acceptance, the two soon smiled smugly together. "Good to know. Once you leave this house, never rely on us again. Our relationship ends here. Whatever happens to you, we want no part in it. Don't even think of contacting us." Receiving this intense sentiment from my mother, I packed only my essentials and left the house. A few days after the inheritance discussion, something unexpected happened. I received a call from my mother. My mother, who had claimed she would cut off contact with me, was suddenly on the phone, confronting me angrily. "What have you done? Where has all the money from your father's account gone? Why are you suddenly calling? Didn't you say you wouldn't contact me?" "Silence. This is an emergency. Return your father's savings immediately." "What are you talking about? I left the passbook at the old house. I have no way of accessing it after I left. But the money in the account is definitely gone. Such a significant amount of his savings couldn't have disappeared so suddenly. I found it suspicious when you managed to move out so quickly without a job," she snapped, assuming I had squandered my father's money. "Mom, haven't you ever checked the account balance before?" "Huh? I haven't bothered with such things." "I see. If you had, you would have noticed that Dad's savings weren't that much to begin with." "What do you mean? His savings were? Where did his retirement money go?" "We used it for our wedding ceremony and the new house." "Wedding? New house? I have no idea what you're talking about." I had been in a romantic relationship with a man named Sean, who was in charge of the caregiving service for my father. Our relationship started through our mutual care for my father. I had told my father about my relationship with Sean soon after we began dating. Sean proposed, but at that time, I was overwhelmed with caregiving and work responsibilities and couldn't make a decision. Upon learning the truth, my father had said, "Care for yourself more than me. I want you to have a happy marriage," my father had said, cheering me on despite my hesitations. He even started helping with the wedding venue selection and looking for a new place to live. We had reserved a wedding date for the following year and even signed a contract for a new apartment that my father liked. This all happened 6 months before we found out that he had terminal cancer. As a gesture of gratitude, my father covered most of the costs for the wedding and the new apartment. That was the reason for the decrease in the account balance. Hearing the turn of events, my mother's voice trembled. She was clearly shaken. So there wasn't any inheritance for us to inherit in the first place. Primarily just the family home, but given its location, we shouldn't expect a high selling price, I replied. Emily, having overheard the conversation, snatched the phone from my mother in panic. "Wait, so the financial assistance for your wedding is much more than the inheritance for Mom and me?" "That seems to be the case. Dad knew about my marriage and me leaving the house, so maybe he didn't see a problem in leaving the family home to both of you. He might have used a significant amount for me and intended the inheritance to compensate for that. Could it be that the reason you quit your job was because your marriage had been decided upon?" Emily asked. "That's right. Sean is also involved in investment activities and is financially stable. He wanted me to become a full-time housewife. Also, I thought if I resigned early, I could focus on taking care of our father." "I can't believe it. Why did you keep the news about your marriage and the savings a secret from us?" Taking a deep breath, I answered, "I thought about telling you several times, but every time, neither of you showed any interest and avoided the topic. Why didn't you stop me from taking a break from work or Mom from quitting her part-time job?" "How are we supposed to live now? I wanted to talk to you after the funeral. Wasn't it you and Mom who shut me down, saying you can't expect anything from us? But I thought family members should help each other out. Family. When I was swamped with work and caregiving, you were out having fun, neglecting Dad. How can I think of someone who said such mean things as family? Don't just say whatever is convenient for you." Shocked and lost for words, Emily was taken aback. Afterward, my mother pleaded with me, "Ashley, the truth is, I've already paid for the trip. I also made various purchases expecting the inheritance, so now I have no savings left. So what about it? I've already quit my part-time job, right? If we don't get any inheritance money, we won't have any money for next month. So until I find a new job, I hope you can lend us some. When you kicked me out of the family home, didn't you say you'd never come to me again? That our relationship was over? That you wouldn't interfere with whatever happens to me in the future? About that, neither of you ever helped when Dad and I were going through tough times. Now, when you're in trouble, you want to rely on me. That's incredibly brazen. But if you don't help us now, what will we do?" Without waiting for my mother to finish, I ended the call and blocked their numbers. I was utterly disgusted by my mother and sister, who only claim to be family when they're in trouble. I decided to distance myself from these two. Later on, I heard from various people that although my mother and Emily had canceled their trip, since it was a last-minute cancellation, they couldn't get a refund. They'd been barely scraping by, asking friends and relatives for money. They had to sell their house, but as I expected, they didn't get as much as they hoped with the initial expenses for a new place. With hardly any money left after selling their house and covering moving costs, Emily returned to work. However, because she had asked her colleagues for money, her relationships at work became strained. She had planned to leave her job soon after finding a good partner. But because of the situation, that partner, as well as other men, distanced themselves. Her friends, too, kept their distance. My mother tried to find another part-time job, but her previous workplace had already hired someone else. Due to her age, her job opportunities were limited. She's been working diligently, facing complaints from younger colleagues. Currently, they manage their living expenses with my mother's meager part-time salary and Emily's earnings, slowly repaying their debts. Both of them seem worn out. As for me, I was able to have a small wedding at the venue my father chose. The only regret is that my father couldn't be there for my wedding, but I believe he's watching over our happy moments from somewhere. My married life with Sean has been smoother than expected. We're enjoying peaceful and fulfilling days together. I'm eternally grateful to my father for supporting my relationship with Sean and giving me this opportunity to build a peaceful life with my husband, always remembering my gratitude to my father.
Look, I'm Jess. I crunch numbers for a living, and I guess I'm doing all right for myself. I've got this kid, Alex, a real bright spark, keeps asking questions about everything under the sun. Then there's my other half, Mike. He runs the show at some warehouse, not the career of his dreams, but it pays some of the bills. And it's just enough for Mike, he's not the type to chase more. Our life's what you'd call run-of-the-mill. We wake up, go about our jobs, come back, and do the family thing. Not exciting, but steady. Problem is, the steady's turned shaky lately. Mike, he's been rolling in late from work, looks like he's been through the ringer every time. Bags under his eyes, shirt wrinkled, and his mood stinks. Tried to get him to chat about it, crack that shell of his. But that man's locked up tighter than a bank vault. Mike, what's eating you? I asked him just last night. You're acting all sorts of strange these hours. He just glared at me, all red-eyed and frazzled. It's nothing, Jess. Work's a pain in the neck, that's all. Just lay off, okay? I know when to back off, but it's like a splinter in my mind, you know? He used to be straight with me, and now it's like I'm talking to a brick wall. You're not touching your dinner, Mike. What's up? I tried to nudge him at supper. Nothing fancy, just some meat and potatoes. But he barely poked at it. I said drop it, Jess. I ain't in the mood to chat about my day, he snapped back, pushing the plate away, and that end of discussion looked plastered on his face. Alex piped up from across the table, fork halfway to his mouth. Dad, you gonna come to my game this weekend? You said you'd try. Mike just ruffled Alex's hair, his attempt at a smile more like a wince. We'll see, champ. Your old man's got a lot on his plate right now. I watched them, father and son, an unsaid worry passing between them. That's my world right there, feeling like it might come apart at the seams. There's this static in the air every time Mike walks in late, a mix of sweat and something sour I can't place. He whispers about work stress, but there's a tug in my gut telling me it's more than that, a lot more. Mike's become like those puzzle pieces you find behind the couch, doesn't fit anywhere, doesn't make sense. And the more I push, the more he clams up. What gives? So there you have it. No sugarcoating, no dressing it up. Just our plain Jane life hitting a bit of a rough patch. I've got a kid to raise and bills to pay, and now a husband who's acting like he's got the weight of the world on his shoulders. Only thing is, he won't let me carry a piece of that burden. I'm out here trying to figure it out without letting on to Alex that there's trouble brewing. Gone. Just like that, Mike's car was history. Came home on foot, a look on his face I had trouble reading. Jess, he said, his voice jittery. the car's gone. Stolen. So, call the cops, Mike. My brother can sniff this out. Easy, I said. But he was shaking his head before I even finished the sentence. No way, I've got it covered, he insisted, but he wouldn't look me in the eyes when he said it. The whole thing smelled fishy. He'd never had good luck with cars, but stolen? That was a new one. Got it covered how? You got a private detective in your pocket or something? I teased, trying to lighten the mood, but Mike wasn't having any of it. Just back off, Jess. I said I'll handle it. His words came out harsh, and he walked off to the shower, leaving me standing there with a kitchen full of whys and what-ifs. His dad's car became his new wheels. You should have seen it, a battered thing that coughed more than it roared. Borrowing it for a while, he said, each word heavy like stones. We sat down at the kitchen table, the one with the wobbly leg, and I watched Alex, who looked more and more like his father every day, swinging his feet as he ate his cereal. He was itching to ask about the car, you could tell, but one look from me kept it shut tight in his mouth. Over the rattle of the morning news and Alex's spoon clinking, I decided to push one more time. We should report it, Mike. Insurance will eat us alive if we don't, I said, real casual. Mike slammed his mug on the table, coffee splashing out. Jess, for the last time, drop it. It's not your problem. Alex's feet stopped swinging, and that's when you know it's real bad, when a kid goes quiet all sudden like. The rest of the day was just nuts and bolts. Mike left in his dad's clunker, and I dropped Alex off at school, my head a mess with thoughts screaming in all directions. By the time I clocked into work, I had settled on one thing: I was going to find out what was going on, with or without Mike. Lunch break, my phone buzzed, it was my brother. Jess, you okay? Heard about Mike's car. Need me to take a look? He offered, always the protector, even though we're adults now. I wanted to say yes, tell him everything, but I hesitated. What if Mike was in deeper than just a stolen car? I'll let you know, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady, like it was nothing, just a car gone AWOL, not my world tipping sideways. By the time I got home, the place was silent, no sign of Mike or his troubles. Only Alex at the table, scribbling away at his homework, the TV murmuring in the background. So, here we go again, another chapter in the life of Jess. A missing car, a husband with secrets, and a boatload of unanswered questions. Tomorrow's another day, but one thing's for sure, I can't just sit on my hands. I'm finding out what's going on, one way or another. Mike's not the only one good at keeping things tight under wraps. Ever seen someone there, but not there? That's Mike. Misses dinner, doesn't kiss Alex goodnight, turns invisible come bedtime. Acts like he's on another planet. The weekend rolled around, Alex ready for those bike rides they used to nail every Saturday morning. He's there, helmet on, excitement buzzing off him like bees on a hive. And nothing, Mike's locked away in the bedroom acting like he's turned to smoke. Mike, come on. The kid's waiting. You promised. I yelled through the door, my hand gripping the knob so tight my knuckles got white. I'm not up for it, Jess. Just take him, will you? His voice a muffled surrender from behind the wood. Alex's face fell a mile. I shrugged, combed his hair back with my fingers. Let's go, champ, just you and me this time. We hit the pavement, me pedaling behind him, watching those little legs pump like pistons. He's getting good, too good. Should have been his dad watching. After, over cold sandwiches, I lay it out for his folks. The stolen car, the late nights, the silence heavy as lead. They're good folks, made me feel like family since day one. They listened, hands clasped, a wrinkle of worry etched between shared glances. Jess, kid's his age. His mom started, always the forgiving type. They get like this. You ride it out. Midlife thing or not, he's riding out alone. I shot back, not buying any of this phase talk. He's ditching his son, for God's sake. His dad chimed in, cutting the air with that old sense of authority he can't shake off. Give the man space, Jess. We didn't raise him to bail on family. Space? Feels like he's halfway to the moon right now. I fired off, done with sugarcoating bitter pills. They didn't have the answers, none of us did. So, I sat there, the kitchen clock ticking away your standard awkward silence. They love him, but they're clutching at straws, just like me. Back home, I find Mike on the couch blanketed in shadows, the room dark except for the flicker of some late-night show. Alex is long asleep, dreams and all. We need to talk, Mike. Now, I said, my voice steady as a drumbeat, every word a decision. He peels himself off the couch, tired or defeated, it's hard to tell. What is it, Jess? Mike huffs, like it's an effort just to stand. I'm not blind, something's gnawing at you. It's eating us up, all of us. My words clipped out like bullets. Mike's eyes finally lift to meet mine, some spark in their fighting through the fog. Jess, it's a mess you don't need to be in. Oh, I'm in it, Mike. You made sure of that when you started sleepwalking through your life. I'd had it, my patience frayed to strands. He leans on the wall. For a sec, it looked like he'd slide to the floor. I can't, not yet. That voice, a whisper of its regular self. Okay, Mike, let's see how long you can keep up this act. I'm clawing for answers, and if Mike won't hand them over, I'll turn over every rock, every dark corner, until everything that's hidden starts spilling out into the light. For Alex, I'll do it. For us, I'll go the distance. The stillness of the night was shattered by the shrill ring of the phone. It was the sound that heralds news, seldom good. Mike's hand shot out to snatch it up, and the blood drained from his face as he listened to the voice on the other end. There were a few hushed, frantic words, and then silence. Heart problems, he said, voice shaking, looking at me with eyes full of terror. Dad's been taken to the hospital. Before I could even process the information, Mike was already dressed and darting for the door, his father's old car keys in hand. Wait! I'll come with you. I cried out, but he was gone. The door slammed behind him, and the sound echoed through the empty house like a grim reminder that I was now alone with my thoughts and the daunting tick-tock of the wall clock. Hours passed, each minute stretching longer than the last, anxiety my only companion. Doubt began to gnaw at me as I watched the moon trace its path across the sky. Against all instincts that screamed at me to stay put, I picked up the phone and dialed my mother-in-law. Is everything okay with Dad? I breathed into the phone when she picked up. There was a pause, a flicker of confusion in her voice. What are you talking about, dear? He's right here, watching the late show with me. The room spun. Mike, he told me there were heart problems, that Dad was taken to the hospital. Oh, honey, she said, her voice laced with worry and something else, something akin to disbelief. There's no hospital. There's no heart issues. Mike never said a word to us about going anywhere tonight. Bile rose in my throat. The betrayal stung like a slap in the face. My husband, the man who was supposed to be my partner in all things life threw at us, had lied straight to my face. Mike left in a panic. Said it was urgent, I managed to say, my own voice sounding distant and foreign. If he's not with you, then where? We'll figure this out. She cut in, her tone attempting reassurance that couldn't reach me. You just stay there with Alex. We'll sort it all out. After I hung up, the silence of the house screamed louder than the ring of the phone ever did. The trust we had, the foundation we built our family on, felt like it had crumbled in an instant. Where was he, and why lie? The questions blazed in my mind, turning over and over without answers. The phone felt heavy in my hand as Ron's voice finally pierced through the static uncertainty. Jess? What's this late call about? Taking a breath to steady myself, I dove in. Ron, Mike mentioned something about you, about a hospital. Is everything all right? Silence enveloped the line for a brief moment before Ron replied. Hospital? No, nothing like that. I'm fine, Jess. Why would Mike say that? A knot tightened in my gut, and I knew something wasn't right. He said you had heart trouble. He took your car. I'm worried, Ron. All right, I can track where my car's gone off to, he offered after a pause. Give me a moment. We hung up, and the ensuing wait filled the room like a thick fog. Alex's sleepy voice broke the silence with a question. Is Grandpa okay? I smiled reassuringly. We'll know soon. True to his word, half an hour later, Ron's voice relayed through the phone. The car's at the city hospital. A silent alarm went off in my head. Thanks, Ron. We're going to check on this, I said, the last words shadowed by a chilling premonition. Grabbing our coats, I quickly dressed Alex. We shared no words on the matter, the gravity of our mission spoke loud enough. Together, we left the warmth of our home for the cool ambiguity of the night. The city's roads lay mostly empty as we made our way to the hospital, the silence in the car a stark contrast to the clamor of thoughts ricocheting in my mind. When we arrived in the parking lot, I found Ron's car, abandoned under the eerie glow of streetlights. Do we go inside, Mommy? Alex inquired, his innocence a striking contrast to the complexity of our situation. I took a deep breath, weighing the options. My instinct urged me to surge forward, to confront the mystery head-on, but caution whispered its words of prudence. The pieces didn't add up, and whatever awaited inside might be something I needed to face without Alex by my side. We'll approach this together, but carefully, Alex. We'll go in, but we have to be prepared for whatever we might find. He nodded, his small hand finding mine, a gesture of silent solidarity. I took Alex by the hand, making sure he stayed close. Remember, stay with me no matter what, I said to him as we walked towards the hospital entrance. The automatic doors slid open with a whoosh, and the sterile smell of the place hit my nose. You could never forget that hospital smell. We navigated through the corridors, my eyes scanning, looking for Mike. And then I saw him, just outside one of the rooms. He wasn't alone. I saw the woman first. Her arms cradling a newborn, looking tired and familiar. Mike looked like he had seen a ghost, his face drained of color the moment our eyes met. What the hell, Mike? I said, louder than I meant to. The woman stepped back, looking between us, holding the baby closer to her chest. Who's she? She asked, her voice blunt. Mike's eyes were glued to my face, his mouth opening and closing with no sound. Jess, this is not what it looks like, he finally stammered out. Really? 'Cause it looks pretty bad from where I'm standing, I shot back. The woman piped up again. He sold his car. For us. To pay the bills here. Mike tried to interrupt, but I put my hand up. I'm not talking to you right now. Turning to the woman, I asked, how long has this been going on? A while, she said flatly, bouncing the baby slightly. And the kid. I couldn't even finish the sentence. Yeah, he's Mike's, she confirmed, looking me right in the eye. I felt like I got punched in the gut. My head was spinning, and I could barely register Alex's hand squeezing mine. Mommy, is the baby sick? Alex's small voice brought me back to reality. No, honey, the baby's fine, I said automatically, still trying to wrap my head around the mess. Mike finally found his voice. Jess, please, let's talk about this. Talk? I almost laughed, but it came out like a bark. You got a whole secret life here, and you want to talk? You should have talked before it got to this. Mike looked down, and I could see he was shaken, but right now I didn't care. Jess, I can explain. Save it, Mike. We're done here, I said, cutting him off. I grabbed Alex's hand and turned to leave. Mike reached out, trying to stop me, but I snapped at him. Don't you touch me. Walking away, I could still hear him calling after me, but his words were just noise. Alex looked up at me with questions in his eyes, but I wasn't ready to answer them yet. We got to the car, and I strapped Alex into his seat, taking a moment to breathe. I could feel tears pricking my eyes, but I held them back. As we drove away from the hospital, away from the unwelcome surprise, I didn't know what was going to happen. But right then, I knew I had to be strong, for Alex. We barely got home when I saw Ron and Linda's car screech into the driveway. They came out fast, walking towards me like they meant business. Linda had that look, the one that meant trouble, big trouble. "Jess, what's going on?" Ron was the first to speak. His eyes were darting around, looking for Mike. "It's done, Ron. We're done. I'm filing for divorce." "The fairy tale's over," I said, not mincing my words. Linda stepped forward. "What the hell did that boy do now?" The anger in her voice hit the air like a slap. I barely had time to tell them everything. Mike's car pulled in, right on cue. He got out, slow, like he was walking to his own funeral. "What the hell, Mike?" Ron was on him like a hawk. "You've got that girl, with a baby." "A baby, Mike." Mike's head hung low, his voice was barely a whisper. "Dad, I'm sorry. I messed up." "Messed up? You call this a mess up?" Linda was almost screeching now. The woman from the hospital stepped out of Mike's car, baby in her arms, and everything just stopped for a second. The look on Ron and Linda's faces, it was like they saw a ghost. "Who's she?" Linda's voice was ice cold now. Mike looked like he was fighting back tears. She's someone I'd been seeing." "Seeing? While you have a family?" Ron's voice boomed. Linda chimed in, "And you got her pregnant while you're married to our daughter-in-law? And we find out at a hospital?" The woman stood there, silent, holding the baby closer when Linda's eyes shot daggers at her. "This ain't sliding by, Mike. No way in hell," I snapped. Mike turned to me, desperation in his voice. "Jess, please. Save it," I cut him off. Linda stepped forward. "You're going to support this child. You're not walking away from this. But believe me, you're gonna pay for breaking our daughter-in-law's heart." Ron nodded. "And we'll be right there with her, every step of the way." Mike just stood there, defeat written all over him. "I'll do whatever it takes." "You bet you will," Ron said, his anger settling into a grim resolve. I looked at all of them, my soon-to-be ex-husband, his mistress, his parents. My lawyer. Tomorrow. I want this settled. Fast. Ron and Linda gave me a nod. "We've got your back," Linda said, and the look in her eye told me she meant every word. I turned on my heel, Alex's hand in mine, and walked back into our now broken home. Mike's voice followed me, saying sorry over and over, but it was too late for sorry. Life had sure done a number on us. But there I sat, on the porch swing, Alex curled up next to me, a math book opened on his lap. The sun was setting, the sky a mix of pink and gold, like a watercolor gone wild. "How's homework going, kiddo?" I asked, not ready to dive back into the adult world just yet. Alex shrugged. "Okay, I guess. The numbers keep doing a dance though." "Yeah, they do that sometimes," I chuckled, ruffling his hair. "They'll settle down if you stare at them long enough." We laughed, the easy sound of it taking the edge off the day. Then the phone buzzed. I pulled it out of my pocket, a text from Linda. "How are you holding up?" it read. I smiled. Linda always had timing like a clockwork. "Getting by. One piece at a time," I texted back. I looked out at the yard, thinking about how different life was now. Mike had taken a serious tumble from the life we once shared. His new place, a cramped apartment above a noisy bar, was a far cry from the house he'd left behind. He was pulling double shifts, trying to make ends meet, pay the alimony and whatever he owed to her. "Mom, when's Dad coming around?" Alex's voice pulled me from my thoughts. "Haven't heard, buddy. But you know, we're doing pretty good, you and I answered. "Yeah, just us," he smiled, and there was something in that smile that told me the kid was going to be all right. Then the other phone rang, the landline. Old school. It jarred the quiet of the evening. Alex jumped up to grab it. I got it, Mom. Careful there, Speedy. I called after him. I heard his little feet pound the hallway. The sound of his laughter as he chatted with whoever was on the other end warmed the space. He was a resilient little man. I took a deep breath. Mom, it's for you, he called out, his voice echoing. I picked up where he left off. Hello? Jess, it's me. Mike's voice was low, almost guilty. What can I do for you, Mike? My voice was colder than I intended. Are you both okay? His voice sounded like it carried the weight of the world. We're managing, Mike. Alex is doing great. There was silence, a long one, then a defeated sigh. That's good. That's good to hear. Mike, look, we're picking up the pieces here. You should be doing the same, I said, more firmly this time. I am, Jess. Or at least, I'm trying. Another pause. He was always heavy with the pauses. Goodbye, Mike. The click of the phone felt like the end of an era. It kinda was. I walked back onto the porch, the creak of the swing welcoming me back. Alex looked up, his eyes were curious. Life was indeed very different now. Just Alex and me, with Grandma and Grandpa popping in enough to keep us smothered in love and bad jokes. The house was quieter, but it was still full of us, our life, our laughter, our love. The days ahead would still have their challenges. Divorce papers don't wipe away the messiness of life, and co-parenting was a road we were still figuring out how to navigate. But that evening, as the sky turned from pink to a deep blue, a sense of peace settled over the house.
My name's Linda, and if you told me a few years back that I'd be juggling a baby, a remote editing job, and a crumbling marriage, I'd have laughed in your face. But here I am, 33 and barely keeping my head above water. It all started when I was assigned to edit a book by Alex Chambers, a writer who was the talk of the town back then. I remember our first call. His voice, deep and a bit rough, came through the line, Linda, Alex Chambers. Got your notes? Let's talk shop. I was professional, of course. Sure, Alex. Chapter 3, the pacing feels off. And the character of John, he needs more depth. There was a pause, then a chuckle. Straight to the point, huh? I like that. That was our routine. Long calls, discussing his book, characters coming alive between us. Then one day, he threw me a curveball. Your voice, Linda, it's, I don't know, calming. Fancy meeting over coffee? Talk about the book face to face? I was taken aback, but curious. Sure, why not? So we met, and things clicked in a way I didn't expect. Fast forward through a whirlwind romance, and I found myself married to Alex Chambers, with a little girl, Lily, to complete the picture. Life was a dream, at first. Alex was charming, attentive. But when Lily came, and I switched to working from home, things started to shift. It started small. Alex, usually brimming with ideas, hit a dry spell. One night, as I was putting Lily to bed, I heard him cursing at his laptop. Nothing. Not a damn word comes to mind, he shouted. I peeked into his office. Hey, what's wrong? He spun around, his face a mix of frustration and despair. This book, Linda. It's like pulling teeth. I can't get the words out. Without thinking, I sat down next to him. Let me take a look. That night, I ended up rewriting half of chapter 4. Alex read it, his eyes widening. This is good, Linda. Really good. A spark of pride flickered in me. But it was soon overshadowed by a new routine. I found myself spending nights at the desk, transforming Alex's jumbled thoughts into coherent chapters. He'd hover over my shoulder, nodding and occasionally mumbling, "Yeah, that's good." One evening, as I wrapped up a chapter, Alex leaned in and kissed my forehead. Couldn't do this without you, babe. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. I was tired, worn out from balancing my work, Lily, and now, Alex's book. I felt like I was losing myself in the process. As weeks turned into months, my role as the secret backbone of Alex's writing solidified. I was the one breathing life into his characters, crafting the twists and turns of his plots. But outside our home office, I was just Linda, Alex's wife. One day, as I was tidying up the living room, Alex walked in, phone in hand. "Hey, Linda, my publisher loved the latest chapter. They think it's some of my best work." I forced a smile. "That's great, Alex." He didn't notice the strain in my voice. "Yeah." I told them I've been working hard on it. I bit back a sharp retort. "Working hard?" It was my words, my nights spent agonizing over every sentence. As Alex's book neared completion, my resentment grew. I was the muse he never acknowledged, the ghost in his success story. I remember confronting him about it one night. "Alex, don't you think I deserve some credit? I've practically written half the book." He looked up, surprised. "What? Linda, come on. It's my name on the cover. That's how it works." I stared at him, disbelief and anger swirling inside me. "So, my work, my words, they mean nothing?" Alex sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You're helping me, Linda. That's what partners do. But it's my book, my career." I walked out of the room, my heart heavy. It was clear to me then. In Alex's story, I was just a footnote, a nameless contributor. And that hurt more than I could say. The night the book was published, I held a copy in my hands. Flipping through the pages, my words stared back at me, hiding behind Alex's name. There was no mention of me in the acknowledgements, not even a subtle hint. I confronted Alex about it, my voice trembling with suppressed emotion. "You didn't even mention me. Not once." He shrugged, oblivious to my hurt. "It's just how it is, Linda. I'm the writer, you're the editor. We each have our roles." That was the moment I realized how invisible I'd become in Alex's world. It was a bitter pill to swallow, a harsh truth I had to face. My life turned into a pressure cooker about to blow. Juggling work, Lily, the house, and Alex's demands had me stretched thinner than a dollar store rubber band. One typical Tuesday, I was knee-deep in laundry when Alex barged in, his face buried in his phone. "Linda, where's my blue shirt? The one I wore at last week's reading?" I pointed to the ironing board without looking up. "It's right there, Alex. Ironed it this morning." He grabbed the shirt and mumbled a half-hearted, "Thanks," already distracted by another text. I shook my head, feeling like part of the furniture. That night, after putting Lily to bed, I sat down to edit a manuscript for work. My eyes were heavy, my brain fried. Alex strolled in, a sheaf of papers in his hand. "Hey, can you look at these? I need your magic touch." I glanced at the clock. It was already past 10. "Alex, it's late, and I've got a pile of editing for work." He frowned, his voice rising. "But this is important, Linda. My publisher's waiting." I sighed, taking the papers. "Fine, but this is the last time, Alex. I can't keep doing this." He scoffed. "What's the big deal? You're just sitting at home all day." I snapped. "Just sitting at home? Really, Alex? Between Lily, the house, and your never-ending book needs, I barely have time to breathe." Alex rolled his eyes. "Dramatic much? I'm the one with the real job here." That stung. "Real job? I'm an editor, Alex, not your personal assistant." He shrugged, clearly not getting it. "Whatever, just do what you can." I worked on his manuscript, resentment boiling inside me. Each word I edited felt like a betrayal to my own work. The next day, as I was fixing lunch, Alex waltzed in, phone in hand again. "Linda, I need you to draft some emails to my publisher. And book my flight to New York next week." I slammed the knife down on the counter. "Do it yourself, Alex. I'm not your secretary. He looked taken aback. What's gotten into you? I exploded. I'm tired, Alex. Tired of being your invisible helper, tired of putting my life on hold. He tried to interrupt, but I plowed on. No, let me finish. I'm also a person, with dreams and a career. But you just take and never give a damn. Alex's face hardened. Fine, do what you want. I don't need your help. I watched him storm out, feeling a mix of relief and dread. But as I stood in the silent kitchen, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get a lot harder. The day I uncovered Alex's infidelity felt like any other, until I stumbled upon something that turned my world upside down. I was sorting through our joint bank statements when I noticed a peculiar charge. Alex had booked a hotel room, supposedly for a fan meetup. But it wasn't a single room like usual, this time, it was a double. My heart pounded as I stared at the screen. A double room? Why would he need that? The question echoed in my mind, but deep down, I feared I already knew the answer. I decided to confront him when he got back. He walked through the door that evening, looking weary but satisfied. Hey, Linda, back from the event. It was great, he said, trying to kiss me. I dodged his kiss and held up the bank statement. Why'd you book a double room, Alex? He glanced at the statement, his face momentarily blank. Oh, that? Must be a mistake. I booked a single, like always. I wanted to believe him, but the doubt had already seated itself. A mistake, huh? Okay. Later that night, after Alex came home drunk, he crashed into bed, leaving his phone carelessly on the nightstand. A voice inside me whispered to check it. I hesitated, but curiosity and suspicion won. Picking up his phone, I felt like a detective in a bad movie, but what I found was no fiction. His messages were a maze of lies and deceit. There it was, a string of texts with someone named Julia. They weren't just friendly, they were intimate, full of plans and secrets. I scrolled through their conversations, each message a stab to my heart. Alex's words about me were the worst, calling me a fool, saying he only kept me around as a servant. Tears blurred my vision, but I kept going, screenshotting everything. Then I found the photos, Alex and Julia, together in ways that left no room for doubt. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion, horrifying, but impossible to look away. I transferred all the evidence to my laptop, a heavy knot forming in my stomach. This was more than a hunch now, it was cold, hard proof of his betrayal. The next day, I acted like everything was normal. Alex, clueless and hungover, didn't suspect a thing. Morning, Linda. What's for breakfast? He asked, rubbing his eyes. Just cereal, I replied, my voice steady despite the storm inside. As he sat eating, oblivious, I studied him. This was the man I married, the father of my child, living a double life right under my nose. Anger and hurt welled up inside me, but I pushed them down. I needed to be smart, to plan my next move carefully. That day, as I went about my chores and work, part of me was elsewhere, plotting, planning. Alex's betrayal had shattered something fundamental between us. But I wasn't going to let him see me break. Not yet. I had to be strategic, to hit him where it hurt most. And for that, I needed to keep my discovery a secret, for now. It was a regular evening, Alex was lounging in his chair, absorbed in his laptop. Lily had just fallen asleep, and the house was quiet. The perfect setting for a confrontation. I approached him hesitantly. Alex, can we talk? It's important. He barely glanced up. Sure, what's up? I took a deep breath, my phone recording in my pocket. I'm burned out, Alex. Writing your books, managing the house, taking care of Lily. I can't do it anymore. His fingers stopped typing. He looked up, his eyes narrowing. What do you mean you can't do it? You know how important this is to me. I persisted, my voice steady despite the churning in my stomach. It's too much. I have my own work, and Lily needs more of my time. I can't write your books for you anymore. Alex's face reddened. You can't just quit, Linda. My career depends on those books. You're supposed to support me, not bail out. I tried to sound as reasonable as possible. Support goes both ways, Alex. I need your understanding now. He scoffed. Understanding? I've given you a comfortable life, a home, and this is how you repay me? By backing out when I need you the most. His words stung, but I needed him to admit the full extent of my role. I've been doing more than backing you up, Alex. I've been writing your books, and it's taking a toll on me. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. You're just the editor, Linda. Let's not overstate your role here. I felt my patience waning. Just the editor? Alex, who do you think has been coming up with the plots, the dialogues, refining the characters? It's been me. His voice rose in anger. So what? My name is on those books. Without me, they'd be nothing. You're nothing without me. I edged closer, ensuring my phone caught every word. Are you saying you'd be nothing without my writing? He laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. Of course not. I'm the author, but you quitting now is like a betrayal. You can't leave me hanging. If you stop writing for me, I'll make sure you regret it. I asked, baiting him further. Is that a threat, Alex? He leaned in, his face inches from mine. Yes, it's a threat. You're my wife, Linda. You do what's needed for this family, for my career. If you think you can just walk away from this, think again. I'll divorce you and make sure you get nothing. I stepped back, my heart pounding. I had what I needed. Okay, Alex. We'll see about that. He stormed off to his office, slamming the door behind him. Alone, I took out my phone and ended the recording. Listening back, his words were damning, an unequivocal admission of his dependence on me, mixed with threats and arrogance. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't sleep. The man I once loved had turned into a stranger, one who saw me as nothing more than a tool for his success. But now, with this recording, the tables were turned. I had the power to expose him, to tear down the facade he'd so carefully built. My mind raced with possibilities. I could take this to his publisher, the media, or use it in a legal battle. Whatever path I chose, one thing was clear, our marriage was over, and it was time for Alex to face the consequences of his actions. The day of Alex's big press conference was my chosen moment for revelation. Clutching the recording of his admission, my plan was set in motion. Alex was oblivious, caught up in his usual pre-event frenzy. Linda, make sure the presentation is spot on. This is huge for me, he stressed, pacing around the living room. I nodded, hiding my nerves behind a calm facade. I've got it under control, Alex. Little did he know, the presentation I had prepared was a far cry from his expectations. I had embedded not just the transcript of our conversation, but also the audio recording, ready to expose his duplicity to the world. The conference day arrived. I was a bundle of nerves and determination, watching as Alex took the stage with his usual flair. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me. Today, I'll give you an insight into my creative process. As the first slide flashed up, Alex's confident smile wavered. The room fell into a stunned silence as his own words appeared on the screen, followed by his voice echoing through the speakers, confessing his reliance on me for his books. The shock in the room was palpable. Alex fumbled for words. There seems to be some mistake. But the damage was done. The crowd was in an uproar, murmurs and gasps filling the air, while cameras clicked frantically, capturing every moment of his unraveling facade. The aftermath of the press conference was like a hurricane tearing through our lives. Alex, once the master of his domain, was now caught in the eye of the storm he had created. His fury when he returned home was palpable, a tempest of anger and disbelief. You've completely destroyed me, Linda. My career, my reputation. How could you? he raged, his voice echoing through the halls of our once peaceful home. I faced him, my resolve unwavering. I'm filing for divorce, Alex. I can't be part of this lie anymore. His anger turned to desperation. Divorce? You can't be serious. Think about Lily, think about what you're doing to our family. I sighed, a weight lifting off my shoulders. It's over, Alex. I know about Julia too. The lies, the betrayal. It's all out now. He sank into a chair, his energy deflated. Linda, I didn't mean for any of this. I shook my head. It doesn't matter what you meant. It's what you did. And now, everyone knows. As his career began to crumble, with publishers distancing themselves and fans expressing their outrage, I took the opportunity to reclaim my voice. I decided to continue the book series under my own name, my work finally receiving the recognition it deserved. In the midst of this, a surprising twist came my way. Alex's mistress, a woman with considerable influence in the media, approached me discreetly. She was desperate to keep her name out of the scandal and offered a substantial sum to ensure her anonymity in court. After much contemplation, I agreed to her terms. This wasn't just about retribution, it was about securing a stable future for Lily and me. The money meant freedom and a fresh start. The day of the divorce hearing arrived, and Alex's demeanor had shifted from anger to a plea for reconciliation. Linda, we can sort this out. We can go to counseling, start over. Please, don't do this. I looked at him, seeing the man I once loved, now a stranger consumed by his own deceit. It's too late, Alex. I can't erase what you've done, the lies you've told. It's over. In the courtroom, the air was tense. Alex's lawyer tried to argue for leniency, but the evidence against him was undeniable. The judge ruled in my favor, granting me a significant compensation and full custody of Lily. Alex was ordered to pay child support, a final blow to his already faltering financial state. Returning home, I watched Lily playing in the living room, her laughter a balm to my soul. I knew the road ahead would be challenging, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. That night, as I tucked Lily into bed, her gentle breathing was a reminder of the new beginning that lay ahead of us. Mommy, will everything be okay? She murmured sleepily. I kissed her forehead, whispering, yes, my love. Everything will be just fine. We have each other, and that's all we need. In the quiet of the night, I reflected on the tumultuous journey. The pain and betrayal had been overwhelming, but they had led me to a newfound strength and independence. It was the end of a painful chapter, but the start of something new, a future where I was the author of my own story, free to write the next chapters as I saw fit. In the wake of our divorce, life settled into a new rhythm. I focused on raising Lily and my burgeoning writing career, now rightfully acknowledged under my name. Alex's presence in our lives dwindled, his visits with Lily becoming infrequent and strained. One afternoon, while Lily was at school, I sat at my desk, working on my latest book. The phone rang, breaking the silence. It was Alex, his voice barely a whisper. Linda, I've messed up, he said, a tremor in his voice. What happened, Alex? I asked, my tone guarded. He sighed heavily. I published a book about my affair. I was desperate, Linda. I thought it might save my career. But I named Julia in it. I was stunned. You named her? After everything? He was quiet for a moment. Yeah, and now she's suing me. She won the case. I have to pay her $1 million, Linda. I'm ruined. I shook my head, disbelief and a twinge of pity mingling inside me. Alex, why would you do that? You knew the consequences. I don't know, Linda. I don't know what I thought. I ended the call, feeling a mix of emotions. It was a stark reminder of how far Alex had fallen, a victim of his own hubris and poor choices. Weeks passed, and the news of Alex's latest fiasco spread. His already tarnished reputation took another hit. Meanwhile, my own career flourished. My books, once hidden behind Alex's name, were now celebrated for their authentic voice and compelling storytelling. One day, as I picked Lily up from school, her teacher, Ms. Adams, approached me. "Linda, I just wanted to say, I've been reading your books. They're incredible. You're so talented." I smiled, a sense of pride swelling in my chest. "Thank you, Ms. Adams. That means a lot." As Lily and I walked home, hand in hand, she looked up at me with her bright, curious eyes. "Mommy, are you happy now?" I squeezed her hand gently. "Yes, Lily, I am. Very happy." It was true. Despite the tumultuous journey, I had found my voice, my independence. I was no longer overshadowed by Alex's deceit. That evening, as I tucked Lily into bed, her soft voice broke the silence. "Mommy, will Daddy be okay?" I paused, choosing my words carefully. "Daddy made some mistakes, sweetheart. But he'll learn from them, hopefully." She nodded, her eyes slowly closing. "I love you, Mommy." "I love you too, Lily. More than anything." As I turned off the light, I realized that this was not just the end of a painful chapter, but the beginning of a new one. A chapter filled with hope, strength, and the unwavering love between a mother and her daughter. In the quiet of the night, I reflected on the journey. Karma had played its hand, and in its wake, left a path for new beginnings. I had emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined. My story, once hidden behind the shadow of another, was now mine to write, and I embraced it with open arms.
I'm Bella, 27, and by no means a pushover. I work as a secretary, a job that has me juggling calls and coffee, all while trying to keep a straight face when my boss cracks one of his stale jokes. Life was a regular routine until that night at a friend's party when I bumped into Jake. Jake was a tall, lanky guy with a smile that could light up the room. He had that effortless charm about him, cracking jokes one minute and deep in thought the next. We got talking, and before I knew it, hours had passed. "Hey, I'm Jake. You look like you could use a better drink than that," he said, nodding at the almost empty plastic cup in my hand. I raised an eyebrow. "And you look like you've got a better suggestion?" "Follow me and find out," he grinned, leading the way to where the real party was, a table laden with all sorts of drinks. We spent the evening talking about everything and nothing. His jokes were actually funny, a refreshing change from the dry humor I was used to at work. As the party wound down, we exchanged numbers. "Don't be a stranger," Jake said as he left, "or do, but only if you're into that mystery vibe." I laughed, tucking away his number. "We'll see, funny guy." As I headed home, I couldn't shake off the feeling that this was the beginning of something. But that night, it was just the city lights, the lingering laughter from the party, and the slight buzz from the drinks. The next few weeks were a blur of texts and calls with Jake. He was like a breath of fresh air, always popping up with a joke or a plan to meet up. It was hard not to get swept up in his energy. Then came the day he invited me over to his place. "You gotta meet the folks," he said casually, as if it wasn't a big deal. "Meet your parents?" I hesitated. "Aren't we moving a bit fast?" "Nah, they're cool. Plus, I want them to meet the girl who's been stealing all my time," he joked, but I could tell he was serious. I agreed, not knowing what I was walking into. Looking back, I wish I had taken a bit more time, maybe then I would have seen what was coming. But life doesn't give you a heads up, does it? No, it just throws you in the deep end and watches as you try to swim. The day to meet Jake's parents came quicker than I'd have liked. I remember standing in front of my closet, trying to pick out something that said "Nice to meet you," and not "I'm here to steal your son." Finally, settling on a simple dress, I took a deep breath and headed out. Jake's house was one of those big, sprawling places with a garden out front. Flowers, trees, you name it, his mom had it growing there. "She'll love to show you around," Jake had said with an enthusiasm I didn't quite share. As we walked up to the door, Jake squeezed my hand. "Don't worry, they're going to love you." The door swung open, and there stood Mrs. Green, a woman with a stern look that could make a grown man flinch. "So, this is her," she said, eyeing me from head to toe. Not exactly the warm welcome I was hoping for. Mom, this is Bella. Bella, my mother, Jake introduced. Charmed, I said, extending my hand. She gave a nod, her lips tight. Come in. Let's not stand around. The inside of the house was as immaculate as the garden. We sat in the living room, and that's when the interrogation began. Mrs. Green didn't waste any time. So, Bella, Jake tells us you're a secretary. That must be interesting, she said, the word interesting hanging in the air like it was a bad smell. Yeah, it's got its moments. Keeps me on my toes, I replied, trying to keep it light. And your boss, he's a man, I presume, she prodded, her eyes narrowing. I nodded. Yes, he is. A very professional and respectful one. Mrs. Green hummed, as if she had expected as much. I suppose you spend a lot of time together, being his secretary and all. I could feel the insinuation heavy in her tone. Jake jumped in. Mom, come on, let's not start this. No, it's okay, I said, feeling a need to defend myself. We work together, but that's it. There's nothing more. Mrs. Green looked at me, then at Jake, and then back to me. I see. Well, as long as it's professional. The conversation stumbled on, every topic somehow circling back to my job or my relationship with my boss. It was like she had a one-track mind set on making me uncomfortable. At one point, Jake excused himself to take a call, leaving me alone with his mother. You know, my son could do a lot better than a secretary, she said, her voice low but clear. I was taken aback. I'm sorry you feel that way. I care a lot about Jake, and I'm not here to cause any trouble. Mrs. Green stood up, her posture rigid. Just so we're clear, I have my eye on you. Any slip up, and I'll make sure Jake sees sense. The threat hung between us, heavy and cold. I sat there, trying to process what just happened. It was clear this wasn't going to be easy. When Jake came back, I plastered a smile on my face, but inside, I was reeling. After a few months of dating, Jake and I decided it was time to take the next step, moving in together. I remember the day I left my small, cozy apartment, boxes in hand, a mix of excitement and nerves bubbling in my stomach. Jake was all grins, helping me settle into what was now our place. It was nice, waking up next to him every morning, sharing coffee and lazy weekends. But as they say, good things never last, especially if Mrs. Green has anything to say about it. One Saturday morning, as we were lounging around, the doorbell rang. Jake went to answer it, and in came Mrs. Green, her eyes scanning the room like she was looking for something, or rather, someone to criticize. Mother! What a surprise, Jake said, clearly caught off guard. Save it, Jacob. I know what's going on here, she snapped, her eyes finally landing on me. Living in sin, are we? Jake's face turned red. Mom, it's not like that. We're serious about each other. She scoffed. Serious? Please. You barely know her. I stood up, feeling the need to defend our relationship. Mrs. Green, I care about Jake, and we're happy together. Happy? She laughed, a harsh sound that filled the room. Let's see how happy you are when the novelty wears off. She walked around, inspecting the place like she was going to find something incriminating. Her eyes landed on a photo of Jake and me at a beach. And what's this? Hardly appropriate, wouldn't you say? Jake tried to intervene. Mom, that's enough. But she was on a roll. I won't have my son shacking up with just anyone. What will people think? I could feel the anger rising in me. We're not hurting anyone. We're adults, making our own decisions. Mrs. Green turned to me, her gaze sharp. You may have fooled my son, but you don't fool me. I see right through you. The argument escalated from there, voices raised, words thrown like punches. In the end, Mrs. Green left, but not before declaring, "This isn't over." Her visit left a sour taste, the tension hanging between Jake and me. We tried to brush it off, go about our day, but it wasn't the same. Her words echoed in the back of my mind, a constant reminder of the disapproval looming over us. As days turned into weeks, the strain grew. small arguments became regular, each one chipping away at the happiness we had built. I couldn't shake the feeling that Mrs. Green was somewhere out there, smirking, pleased with the chaos she had sown. One night, I worked late. The project was a beast, and everyone had left except me and my boss, who was in his office doing who knows what. "Bella, you still here?" my boss called out as he finally emerged. "Yeah, just finishing up this report," I replied, stretching my arms. "Late night, huh? Let me drive you home." "It's not safe this late," he offered. I was tired, the thought of waiting for a bus wasn't appealing, so I agreed. We walked to his car, making small talk about the day. It was all very normal until we pulled up to my place. "Thanks for the ride," I said, reaching for the door. "No problem, Bella. See you tomorrow," he replied with a tired smile. As I got out of the car, I didn't notice Jake standing there, his face a mix of anger and hurt. I realized too late as he stormed towards me. "Bella, what the hell is this?" Jake shouted, his eyes darting from me to my boss driving away. "It's not what it looks like, Jake. He was just giving me a ride home," I tried to explain. "A ride home? At this hour? With him?" He was fuming, not listening to a word I said. "Jake, please, you're overreacting. It's late, I was alone at the office, and he offered to drive me. That's all," I pleaded. "All, huh? And I'm supposed to believe that?" His voice was loud, attracting a few glances from neighbors. "I'm telling you the truth. Why won't you believe me?" My voice cracked, the frustration and hurt bubbling up. "Because I know men like him. And you, out late, with your boss? It's not right," he accused. "Jake, you're being ridiculous. Nothing is going on." "I love you," I said, my voice firm. He scoffed. "Yeah? Well, it sure doesn't look like it." The argument went back and forth, each accusation more hurtful than the last. Eventually, he stormed off, leaving me standing there, alone and bewildered. I grabbed a few essentials and headed back to my old place. The night was quiet, but my mind was a loud mess of thoughts and worries. I couldn't believe a simple act of kindness from my boss would lead to this. No sooner had I settled into my old, now strangely unfamiliar bed, the phone rang. It was Mrs. Green. Her voice oozed satisfaction. "Well, Bella, seems like you've moved back." "Can't say I'm surprised." I knew it was only a matter of time. Her laughter was cold, ringing in my ears long after I had hung up. I lay there, the weight of her words pressing down on me. I realized then that this was far from over. Her glee at my predicament was just another reminder of the uphill battle I was facing, not just with Jake, but with his entire family. And as I drifted into a restless sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread for what was yet to come. Life was quiet after the big blowout with Jake. I kept to myself, trying to mend the pieces of my bruised heart. Days turned into weeks, and just as I started to feel a bit like my old self again, life decided to throw me another curveball. I found out I was pregnant. I remember sitting in my bathroom, staring at the positive test. A mix of emotions flooded through me: fear, excitement, but mostly a deep, nagging worry about how Jake would react. I debated telling him, going back and forth in my mind, but eventually, I decided against it. I would raise this child on my own. But secrets have a way of coming out, and this one was no different. Jake found out. I still don't know how, but one day, there he was, standing at my door, looking as shocked and scared as I felt. "Bella, is it true? Are we going to have a baby?" he stammered, his face pale. I nodded, unable to form words. The silence stretched between us, heavy and awkward. "Why didn't you tell me, Bella? Why?" he finally managed, his voice a mix of hurt and anger. I was scared, Jake. Scared of how you'd react, scared of doing this all alone," I confessed, the words tumbling out. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration I knew all too well. "We should have talked about it. It's not just your decision, Bella." I knew he was right, but at the moment, it didn't seem that simple. "I know, and I'm sorry. I didn't know what to do." We talked for hours, going in circles, the same arguments, the same fears. But as the night wore on, something shifted. We started to see not just the challenges, but the possibilities. Maybe, just maybe, we could do this together. In a decision that surprised both of us, we agreed to start over. We decided to get married, but this time, we'd do it our way, away from all the drama and judgment. A simple courthouse ceremony, just us and a couple of friends. It was quick, maybe a bit impulsive, but it felt right. The day we got married was nothing like I'd ever imagined. No fancy dress, no big party. Just the two of us, exchanging vows in a small, stuffy room. But when I looked into Jake's eyes, I knew it was perfect. We kept it a secret, not ready to deal with the fallout from his family, especially Mrs. Green. We needed time to adjust, to prepare for the baby, to figure out how we were going to handle everything. It was our little bubble of happiness, fragile, but ours. Jake and I were living in our little world, trying to prepare for the baby's arrival. But we both knew we couldn't keep our secret forever. The day finally came when Jake decided it was time to tell his parents. "We gotta do it, Bella. They need to know about the baby, about us," he insisted one morning, a determined look on his face. I was scared, to say the least. "But what about your mom? You know she's gonna flip." He took my hands in his. "I'll handle Mom. You just focus on you and the baby." So, we went to his parents' house. My heart was pounding as we walked up the driveway. The door opened, and there stood Mrs. Green, looking as stern as ever. "Jacob, what are you doing here?" "And you brought her," she said, eyeing me with disdain. "Mom, we've got something to tell you." "It's important," Jake said, stepping in front of me slightly. She let us in, the curiosity clear on her face. We all sat down, the tension thick in the air. Jake took a deep breath and began. "Mom, Dad, Bella, and I got married a few months back. And we're expecting a baby." There was a moment of stunned silence before Mrs. Green erupted. "Married? A baby? How could you be so irresponsible?" "Mom, it's not like that. We love each other. We're happy," Jake tried to explain. "Happy? Look at her. She's trapped you with this child," Mrs. Green accused, pointing a finger at me. I felt my face heat up. I didn't trap anyone. This baby is a blessing, not a trap. "Don't talk back to me, girl. I know your type," she snapped. Jake stood up, his face red with anger. "Enough, Mom. This is my life, my wife, my child. If you can't accept that, then maybe we don't need to be part of yours." The room fell silent, Mrs. Green's face red with anger, but there was a flicker of something else, maybe fear, maybe realization. Mr. Green, who had been silent till now, put a hand on her shoulder, a silent plea. She looked at him, then back at us, her face softening just a fraction. I need time to process this." We left shortly after, the air between us heavy but hopeful. As we drove away, Jake squeezed my hand. That went better than expected. I laughed, despite everything. Yeah, if you consider World War III better than expected. But it was out now, the truth. We were married, expecting a baby, and for better or worse, his family knew. It felt like a weight had been lifted, but at the same time, a new worry had settled in. How would Mrs. Green react once the news really sunk in? Would she come around, or would she be an ever-present thorn in our side? Only time would tell, but for now, we had each other, and that was enough. As we drove home, the sun setting in the distance, I felt a sense of peace. We were together, we were strong, and no matter what came our way, we'd face it together, as a family. A few weeks had passed since the big reveal to Jake's parents. Things were quiet, almost eerily so. Then, one afternoon, Mrs. Green showed up at our door, unannounced, with a homemade cake in hand. "Bella, I baked this for you. A peace offering, let's say," she said, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. I was taken aback, not sure what to make of this sudden gesture. Thanks, Mrs. Green. That's unexpected." She smiled, a bit too sweetly. "Call me Mother, dear." After all, we are family now. After some awkward small talk, she left, leaving the cake on the kitchen counter. I invited a friend over to share the cake. "Hey, Lisa, wanna come over for some cake?" It's a long story. Lisa arrived, and I cut the cake, serving us both a piece. But as fate would have it, she was on a new diet kick and refused at the last minute. "You know what, I'll take it home for later. My cheat day's tomorrow." She laughed, wrapping up a big slice. I shrugged and took a bite of mine. It was delicious, almond flavor bursting in my mouth. But as the evening wore on, I started feeling odd, queasy. I chalked it up to pregnancy nausea and went to bed early. But the nausea didn't go away, it got worse. By midnight, I was violently ill, and Jake rushed me to the hospital. After what felt like endless tests and worried looks from doctors, they told us the shocking news. There was a toxic substance in my system, something commonly used in gardening to kill pests. Jake's face went white as he realized the implication. The cake, my mom. I was too weak to respond, a cold dread settling in my stomach. Had Mrs. Green really tried to harm me, to harm her own grandchild? I was kept in the hospital overnight, and by morning, I was feeling a bit better, but the emotional toll was immense. Jake was a mess, torn between worry for me and disbelief that his mother could do such a thing. We were talking on the phone about it, Jake's voice heavy with concern. "We need to figure out what to do next," when suddenly the door to my room creaked open, and in walked Mrs. Green. I quickly muted the phone but didn't hang up, Jake still listening in. "Bella, how are you feeling, dear?" she asked, her voice dripping with faux concern. I looked at her, feeling a mix of anger and disbelief. "I'd been better," I said, coldly. She tooted. "Such a shame about the sickness." "And the baby?" "The baby is fine," I replied, watching her reaction closely. Her face faltered for just a moment, a flash of disappointment crossing her features. "Well, that's good to hear," she said, but the words felt hollow. Then, with a smirk, she added, "Of course, you have no proof of what caused your little incident." I made sure of that when I threw away the rest of that cake first thing this morning. My heart raced, Jake still on the line, hearing every word. She had just admitted to it, not realizing the call was still connected. As she turned to leave, I looked down at the phone, a plan forming in my mind. Mrs. Green might think she's covered her tracks, but she was wrong. We had her confession, and now it was time to make her face the consequences. After Mrs. Green left the hospital room, I called Lisa, who thankfully hadn't eaten her piece yet. She was horrified by the news, and agreed to bring the cake to the police as evidence. Then I dialed Jake again. "Jake, did you hear all that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah, every single word," he replied, anger seething through his tone. "I can't believe she'd go this far. I'm coming back to the hospital, and we're going to the police. We've got her now, Bella." By the time Jake arrived, I had managed to steady my nerves. Together, we went to the police station, the phone recording in hand. The officers listened intently, their expressions growing grimmer with every word Mrs. Green had unwittingly spilled. They assured us they would investigate immediately. The next few days were a blur of police visits, interviews, and a growing sense of dread about what was to come. Mrs. Green was brought in for questioning, and with the evidence stacked against her, she had no choice but to confess to her horrendous act. The news of her arrest spread quickly, and suddenly, the whole town was buzzing about the scandal. Jake stayed by my side through it all, his support unwavering. "I'm so sorry, Bella. I never thought she'd do something like this." "I know, Jake. But we're together in this, that's what matters," I reassured him, squeezing his hand. The trial date was set quickly, given the severity of the crime. Mrs. Green faced the judge, her usual stern demeanor replaced by a look of defeat. The evidence was undeniable, and she was found guilty of attempted poisoning. The sentence was harsh, but just, given the potential consequences of her actions. As we walked out of the courtroom, Jake and I both felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. It was over, but at such a cost. His mother, the woman who had raised him, was now behind bars because of her own twisted actions. We decided it was time to move on, to focus on the future and the arrival of our baby. The house felt quieter, the air lighter, as if a dark cloud had been lifted. Our friends and family rallied around us, their support a constant source of comfort. One evening, as we sat on the porch, Jake wrapped his arm around me. "We've been through hell, Bella, but we made it. I love you, and I can't wait to start this new chapter with our little one." I leaned into him, my head resting on his shoulder. "Me too, Jake. It's going to be a fresh start for all of us." The baby kicked, as if in agreement, and we both laughed. It was a sound of pure joy, a sign that despite everything, we were going to be okay. As the sun set, painting the sky in hues of pink and orange, I realized that justice had been served, not just in the courtroom, but in our lives too. We had been tested, pushed to our limits, but in the end, we emerged stronger, united, and ready to face whatever the future held. In the quiet of our home, the memories of Amy, our only daughter, echoed off the walls. She was always more firecracker than flower, pushing boundaries and testing limits. As a dentist, I've seen my share of pain, but nothing quite compares to the ache of a child pulling away. My husband, John, a seasoned cop, always had a way of smoothing things over, but even he was at a loss when Amy packed up and left with that rock musician, her teenage rebellion reaching its peak. "John, how did we get here?" I asked one evening, staring at the empty chair Amy once occupied at our dinner table. One day she's sneaking out to concerts, the next, she's gone without a trace. John sighed, his eyes heavy with the same unsaid questions. "She's always been wild, Martha. Like a storm, you can't predict or tame it. But she's still our girl." But as days turned into months, with nothing but silence from Amy, the weight of her absence grew heavier. It wasn't until a photograph landed in our mailbox that we saw her again, not in person, but in a wedding picture, looking defiantly happy next to a man with a guitar and tattoos. No invitation, no call, just a snapshot of the life she chose over us. I remember my hands shaking as I held the photo, the hurt a tangible thing between us. "Look at her, John. Not even a note, just this picture. She's made her choice, hasn't she?" John, ever the rock, tried to calm the storm brewing in me. "Maybe she's trying to reach out in her own way, Martha. It's a start, right?" But his words did little to soothe the sting of rejection. We continued on, our home feeling larger and lonelier by the day. Work was a distraction, patients and procedures filling the void left by Amy's laughter and chaos. Months had worn into a year with no word from Amy, and just when the silence seemed permanent, our computer pinged a Skype call. It was Amy, her face filling the screen, looking so different yet painfully familiar. "Mom, Dad, I need your help," she said, the edges of her voice ragged with wear. John and I exchanged a glance, the kind that speaks volumes without a word. "Amy, what's going on?" I asked, my heart hammering against my chest. She hesitated, her eyes darting away before locking back onto the screen. It's a lot. I've got a baby now, a little girl. And things, well, they aren't great. I need money, Mom, $1,000 a month." John's brow furrowed, his cop instincts on alert. "A grandkid? Amy, slow down. Why do you need the money?" She bit her lip, a nervous habit from childhood. "I just do, Dad. Please, I wouldn't ask if it wasn't serious." We sat in silence, the weight of her plea hanging heavy. Finally, I nodded, my decision firm, despite the whirlwind of questions. "All right, Amy. We'll help. But please, talk to us. What's been happening?" She looked down, a tear tracing her cheek. "I can't. Not now. Just, thank you. This means everything." The call ended abruptly, leaving John and I staring at a blank screen. "What do you think, John? Did we just make a mistake?" I murmured, the doubt creeping in. He shook his head, his hand finding mine. No, Martha. She's our daughter, and she's in trouble. It's our job to help, no questions asked. But a grandchild, John. A whole year, and she's kept this from us. What else don't we know? I couldn't keep the tremble from my voice. We'll find out, love. For now, let's just be there for her. However she'll let us, he replied, his voice a steady anchor in the storm. The days that followed were a blur of bank transfers and uneasy silence. I kept busy, the clinic a welcome distraction, but every time I came home, I half expected Amy to be there, waiting with her child. But the house remained quiet, our lives suspended in a state of waiting and worry. One evening, as we sat in the living room, the air thick with unsaid fears, John broke the silence. She'll reach out again, Martha. When she's ready. I nodded, clinging to his optimism like a lifeline. I hope you're right. I want to hold my grandchild, to tell Amy it's going to be okay. We will, love. We will, he assured me, though I saw the shadow of his own doubts flickering in his eyes. I whispered a silent prayer for my daughter and granddaughter, wherever they were. The plea had opened old wounds and new fears, but it had also rekindled a flame of hope. We were still a family, fractured and distant, but connected by unbreakable bonds of love and the unwavering promise to be there for each other, no matter what. It was one of those early mornings when the cold bites at your bones, the world outside frosted and still. John and I were nestled in the warmth of our home, sipping coffee, the silence comfortable, if not a bit heavy with unspoken thoughts about Amy. That's when the sharp knock came, shattering the calm like a stone through glass. John and I exchanged a startled look, the same question in our eyes, who could it be at this hour? He stood up, moving towards the door, while I followed close behind, a knot of worry tightening in my stomach. He swung the door open and there, on our doorstep, was a sight that knocked the breath from me. Amy, thinner and more worn than I remembered, clutching a small bundle wrapped in blankets. Her eyes, red and swollen from crying, met mine, and it was as if the years of silence fell away in an instant. Amy? Oh my God, Amy! I cried out, rushing forward to wrap her in an embrace, the cold forgotten. Mom, Dad. I'm so sorry. Can we come in? Her voice was a whisper, hoarse and fragile. Of course, come in. John's voice was firm, guiding her gently inside as I quickly shut the door against the cold. Once inside, Amy unwrapped the bundle, revealing a tiny, sleeping face, peaceful despite the chaos. This is your granddaughter, she said, her voice breaking. Tears streamed down my face as I looked at the baby, so innocent and unaware of the storm she'd been born into. She's beautiful, Amy. What's her name? Amy hesitated, a shadow crossing her face. Lily. Her name's Lily. John, ever the practical one, sprung into action. You both look frozen. Martha, let's get them warmed up. I'll make some food. As I helped Amy out of her coat, the threadbare fabric and worn shoes didn't escape my notice. She was shivering, her body frail and tired. I ushered her to the living room, piling blankets around her and the baby. John brought in food, setting it before Amy, who ate with a hunger that spoke of too many missed meals. Lily, now awake, watched with wide, curious eyes, her little hand wrapped around my finger. Once Amy had eaten her fill, she looked up at us, her eyes holding a depth of pain and regret. I need to tell you everything. It's been so bad, worse than you can imagine. John and I sat, our hearts heavy with dread and love, ready to listen. As she spoke, her voice trembled with the weight of her story, each word painting a picture of a life unraveled, of dreams turned to nightmares. When she finally finished, the room was heavy with silence. I reached out, taking her hand in mine. Amy, we're here now. You're safe, both of you. John nodded, his face set in a determined line. We'll take care of you. Whatever it takes. Amy broke down then, tears streaming down her face, a mix of relief and sorrow. "I'm so sorry. I was so stupid, so proud. I should have come back sooner." I pulled her into a hug, rocking her gently. "Shoo, it's okay. You're home now. We'll fix this, together." Once Amy had settled a bit, Lily sleeping soundly in a makeshift bed we'd cobbled together, she began to unravel the story we'd been missing. John and I sat across from her, our hearts heavy, bracing ourselves for what was to come. "Mom, Dad. I don't even know where to start. Everything's been a mess since the day I left with him," Amy began, her fingers twisting a loose thread on the blanket. "Just start from the beginning, sweetheart. We're here to listen," I urged gently, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Amy took a deep breath, her eyes fixed on the sleeping form of Lily. "It was all good at first, you know? Exciting, even. But then, after we got married, things changed. He changed. The music gigs dried up, and he started drinking, a lot. And then..." Her voice trailed off, a shiver running through her. John leaned forward, his face a mask of concern. "And then what, Amy?" She looked up, tears glistening in her eyes. "Then he started getting angry, at everything. At me. It wasn't long before he started hitting me." A sharp gasp escaped my lips, my hand flying to my mouth. John's jaw clenched, his hands forming fists on his knees. "That bastard," he muttered under his breath. Amy continued, the words pouring out now, a floodgate opened. "I thought I could handle it, that I could make it stop. But then I got pregnant with Lily, and everything got worse. He didn't work, just drank and yelled and more. I was scared, all the time." The room felt impossibly heavy, each word a weight added to our already burdened hearts. "Why didn't you come to us, Amy? Why didn't you tell us?" I asked, my voice a mix of pain and frustration. "I was ashamed, Mom. Ashamed and scared. I thought I'd made my bed and had to lie in it. But when Lily was born, I realized I couldn't let her grow up in that. That's when I called you for the money. It was the only way I could think of to keep us afloat." John stood abruptly, pacing the room. "And his parents? What role did they play in all this?" Amy's lips quivered as she spoke. "They were just as bad, in their own way. His mom, she would make me do all the housework, watch every penny. If I did anything wrong, she'd take it out on me, on Lily. They all would." I reached across, taking her hand in mine. "You're safe now, Amy. You and Lily. We'll take care of you." Amy nodded, a frail smile on her lips. "I know, Mom. That's why I came here. I knew if anyone would help us, it would be you." John nodded, his face set in a grim line. "Tell us how you managed it, Amy. We need to know everything to protect you." She took a deep breath, her hands wrapped tightly around her coffee mug. "It wasn't easy. I had to wait for the right moment. His parents were out, and he was passed out drunk, like usual. I grabbed Lily, some clothes, and whatever cash I could find. I didn't even have a car seat, just wrapped her in blankets and ran." I shuddered, imagining my daughter and granddaughter in such peril. "Oh, Amy, that's so dangerous. But you're here now, that's what matters." She continued, her eyes distant as she recounted the escape. "I hitched a ride to the nearest bus station. People must have seen the desperation in my eyes, no one asked too many questions. Each mile away from that house felt like a tiny victory." John's hand found mine under the table, a silent message of solidarity. "And no one followed you? You were sure you weren't followed?" Amy shook her head. "I was careful, Dad. I know you taught me to be observant. I made sure we weren't followed. I just couldn't stay there a moment longer, not with Lily." I stood up, moving to the stove to busy myself with making more coffee, the actions mundane but necessary to keep the tremors at bay. You're brave, Amy. So brave. We'll make sure you never have to go back there. The day passed in a flurry of activity, securing the house, making appointments with lawyers and therapists, anything and everything to ensure Amy and Lily's safety and well-being. John was on the phone most of the day, his voice a low rumble of barely contained fury and action. As night fell, Amy sat on the living room floor, Lily crawling around her, a scene so normal yet charged with the undercurrents of their recent ordeal. I can't thank you enough, both of you. I feel like I'm finally breathing again. John looked up from his paperwork, his gaze softening. You're our daughter, Amy. There's nothing we wouldn't do for you and Lily. I sat down beside her, the carpet soft beneath me. We meant it when we said forever, Amy. Forever means through the hard times too. She leaned against me, her body weary but her spirit flickering with the start of something new, hope, perhaps, or the beginning of healing. I know, Mom. I know. As we settled in for the night, the house felt different, as if the very walls were bracing to protect its inhabitants. Amy and Lily slept in the guest room, their breaths soft and even in the quiet. John and I lay in bed, our hands clasped between us, a silent vow to face whatever came next together. The escape to safety was just the beginning, but as I drifted off to sleep, I knew we were ready for it. Ready to fight, to protect, and to heal. Our family, once broken, was mending, one day, one moment at a time. With resolve hardening in our hearts, John and I drove to the address Amy had tearfully provided. The house loomed ahead, shabby and forlorn, a stark contrast to the warm, loving home we had left. Ready? John asked, his voice a low rumble of contained anger. I nodded, bracing myself for what was to come. We walked up to the decrepit door and knocked firmly. Shuffling feet approached from inside, and the door creaked open to reveal Amy's husband, a picture of neglect and disdain. We need to see Amy and the baby, John demanded, his gaze steely. The husband, with a dismissive snort, replied, They're sleeping. What do you want at this hour? The blatant lie made my blood boil. Sleeping? Don't play dumb. Amy's been with us since yesterday. She told us everything. I snapped, my voice sharp with fury. Behind him, his parents appeared, their expressions sour and defensive. What's all this about? Our daughter-in-law is fine, just sleeping off her tantrums, the mother sneered, a vile attempt at nonchalance. John stepped closer, his presence imposing. You think we're fools? Amy's safe from your abuse now. She's at our house, and she's told us everything. The trio exchanged nervous glances, the facade crumbling. You can't prove anything, the father blustered, trying to regain some ground. Without a word, John reached into his coat and flashed his police badge. The effect was immediate. Their faces drained of color, their previous arrogance replaced by fear. We're just a family trying to get by, the mother whimpered, her bravado gone. John's voice was cold, the anger controlled but palpable. A family that preys on its weakest members? I don't think so. You'll be hearing from us, and from the authorities. We turned and left them there, standing in their doorway, the reality of their situation sinking in. As we drove away, the weight of what we had started hung heavy in the air. Amy, holding Lily close, met us as we walked in. Her eyes, filled with a mix of hope and fear, searched ours for answers. They're scared now, Amy. Scared of the consequences. You and Lily are safe, John assured her, his hand resting on her shoulder. The night closed in around us, the house a sanctuary against the darkness outside. As we settled in, I felt a mixture of exhaustion and relief. The first step had been taken, the demons confronted. And though the journey was far from over, we had faced it together, a united front against the past and whatever future might bring. Our family, once fractured, was finding its way back, one truth, one moment at a time. The morning after confronting Amy's in-laws, John and I sat at our kitchen table, a silent agreement between us. Today we would ensure justice for Amy and Lily. John, with his years of experience on the force, made calls, his tone official and stern, setting the wheels of justice in motion. Amy, can you tell us everything again? The authorities will need your statement, John said as he prepared a notepad, his expression serious but encouraging. Amy nodded, a determined glint in her eyes, despite the shadows of her recent past. Yes, I'll tell them everything. They need to know what he did, what they all did. As she recounted her story, her voice trembled but never broke. She was a portrait of courage, a stark contrast to the frightened girl who had appeared on our doorstep. And when Lily was born, things got worse. I was isolated, controlled. I couldn't let her grow up in that. I reached over, squeezing her hand. You're doing the right thing, Amy. They won't hurt you or Lily ever again. Hours passed, filled with calls and visits from officers and lawyers, each step a move towards accountability and protection. Finally, with Amy's statement recorded and the legal process underway, we had a moment to breathe. Mom, Dad, will they go to jail? Amy asked, her eyes searching ours for assurance. John nodded, his voice firm. They're facing charges of abuse and extortion. It's a strong case, especially with your testimony. They won't be free to hurt anyone else. The relief in Amy's eyes was palpable. She hugged Lily to her, whispering words of love and safety to her daughter. The day turned to evening, and as we sat together, a sense of calm settled over the house. I can't believe it's finally happening, Amy murmured, a small smile touching her lips. It's only the beginning, sweetheart. But we'll be with you every step of the way, I reassured her, my heart swelling with pride for her bravery. John stood, looking out the window into the growing darkness. They'll learn that you don't mess with family. Not without consequences. We sat in quiet solidarity, the trials of the past few days bonding us in ways we couldn't have imagined. The journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, there was a sense of hope, a light at the end of a long, dark tunnel. As night fell and we prepared for bed, I checked on Amy and Lily, sleeping peacefully in the guest room. The sight of them, so serene, was a balm to my weary soul. We had faced the demons, and though the scars remained, we were healing, moving forward together. As the days turned into weeks, the dark cloud that had loomed over our family started to dissipate. Amy, now officially divorced and free from the man and the in-laws who had caused her so much pain, was finding her footing again. The legal proceedings had seen her husband and his parents imprisoned for their violence and extortion, a fitting end to their reign of terror. During breakfast one morning, as we all sat together, the atmosphere was lighter, almost buoyant. You know, I've been thinking, I began, watching Lily attempt to spoon-feed herself, how far we've come. It's like we've stepped into the light after such a long time in the dark. Amy, with a newfound strength in her eyes, smiled. Yeah, Mom. It's like I'm finally waking up. The divorce, the trial, it's all behind me now. I can actually look forward to the days ahead. John, always the backbone of our family, nodded in agreement. That's right. We're all moving forward now, stronger and wiser. Lily's giggles punctuated our conversation, a reminder of the innocence and joy that had returned to our home. As the day unfolded, Amy and I found ourselves in the garden, planting new flowers, a symbolic gesture of our new beginnings. Mom, can you believe how much Lily's grown? Amy remarked, her hands deep in the earth. I smiled, handing her a seedling. She's going to be as strong and beautiful as her mother, and as resilient as her grandma, too. As evening approached, John joined us outside, wrapping an arm around my shoulder. Look at our little family, Martha. This is what life's all about. I leaned into him, my heart full of gratitude. Yes, it is. A new beginning, a fresh start for all of us. Dinner was a lively affair, with Amy sharing her plans for the future, her voice tinged with excitement. I'm thinking of going back to school, maybe even starting my own business. I want Lily to have a life filled with possibilities. John raised his glass, his eyes shining with pride. To new beginnings, to family, and to justice. May we always find strength in each other. We toasted to our future, the sound of our glasses clinking a sweet symphony of hope and determination. As the night drew in, I tucked Lily into bed, watching as Amy sat beside her, a serene look on her face. I whispered a silent prayer of thanks as I turned off the light, grateful for the second chance we'd been given. As I lay next to John, his presence a constant source of comfort, I knew that our journey hadn't been easy, but it had brought us here, to this moment of peace and togetherness.
Hey, you gonna just sit there all day? Mrs. Thompson's voice cut through the silence like a knife. I was in my makeshift office, a small table in the corner of the bedroom, trying to focus on my web design project. I looked up, meeting her stern gaze. Just working, Mrs. Thompson, I replied, trying to keep my voice even. She snorted, clearly unimpressed. Working? Looks like you're just playing on that computer. When I was your age, I had real chores. I sighed inwardly. This was a daily ritual. Ever since I moved into the Thompson house, after marrying Mark, her son, I'd felt like an outsider. Mark, a kind-hearted man with a constant travel schedule for work, was my rock. But with him away, the house felt cold, uninviting. Anna, Mark's sister, walked in, her two kids trailing behind her. "Mom, have you seen my phone charger?" she asked, ignoring me completely. "Try the living room," Mrs. Thompson suggested, still eyeing me suspiciously. I returned to my screen, trying to block out their conversation. Anna's kids, Lily and Max, ran around, their shrieks piercing the air. I loved kids, but these two were wild, unchecked. "Rose, can you watch the kids? I need to run an errand," Anna said, assuming more than asking. "I really need to finish this project, Anna," I replied, feeling the pressure. "It's not like you're doing anything important," she retorted, her voice tinged with condescension. I bit back a sharper retort. Mark always said to keep the peace. But it was hard, especially with Anna treating me like a free babysitter and her mother questioning my every move. The door opened, and Mark stepped in, a brief respite in my day. "Hey, love," he greeted, wrapping his arms around me. "Hey," I smiled, feeling a momentary relief. "How's everyone?" he asked, looking around. "Just the usual," I replied, glancing at his mother and sister. Mrs. Thompson interjected, "Mark, tell your wife to help more around here. She's always on that computer." Mark looked at me, then back at his mother. "Mom, Rose works hard. Her job is just as valid as any other." Anna rolled her eyes. "Sure, if you call sitting all day work. Mark sighed. "Anna, let's not start this again." I appreciated Mark's support, but I could tell he was tired of playing mediator. As he left to unpack, Mrs. Thompson gave me a look that could curdle milk. "Remember, Rose, this is my house. You follow my rules," she said sharply. I nodded, feeling the familiar knot of frustration in my stomach. I was an orphan, with no family to turn to. This was my home now, but it didn't feel like it. As I turned back to my computer, I promised myself that things would change. Mark and I were saving for our own place. A home where respect and kindness weren't foreign concepts. A place where I could work in peace, love openly, and be myself. The house was buzzing with noise, but I felt more alone than ever. Mark had just left for another one of his work trips, and the emptiness he left behind was tangible. I was in the kitchen, trying to fix myself some toast, when Mrs. Thompson barged in. "Can't you make something more useful? You're always eating bread. No wonder you're so skinny," she remarked, her tone dripping with disdain. "Just not very hungry, Mrs. Thompson," I replied, keeping my voice calm. You'd be hungry if you did some real work around here, she shot back, rummaging through the fridge. I sighed and left the kitchen with my toast. Eating in my room seemed like a better option than enduring another round of criticism. Later, as I tried to concentrate on my work, Anna's voice echoed from the hallway. Rose, can you watch the kids again? I've got to run out. Anna, I really need to get this work done. It's important, I responded, feeling the frustration build up. Oh, come on, it's just clicking around on a computer. How hard can it be? Anna retorted, her voice laced with sarcasm. I bit my tongue, resisting the urge to argue. It was easier to agree than to start another fight. Fine, I'll watch them, I conceded. As I tried to manage Lily and Max, who were more interested in playing tag around my workspace, I realized how isolated I felt in this house. Surrounded by people, yet so alone. That night, I heard Anna and Mrs. Thompson talking in the living room. She's not right for Mark. Just sits in her room all day, doing God knows what on that computer. Mrs. Thompson's voice was sharp and clear. Yeah, and have you noticed how she never joins us for meals anymore? As if she's too good for us, Anna added, her words like daggers. I lay in bed, their words stinging. I missed Mark's presence, his understanding. He was the buffer between me and their constant judgment. Without him, it felt like I was an easy target. The next day, as I made myself another solitary meal, Mrs. Thompson walked in. You know, if you spent more time with us, maybe you'd feel more part of the family, she said, her tone accusatory. I looked at her, feeling the irony of her words. I try, Mrs. Thompson, but it's hard when I feel like everything I do is wrong in your eyes, I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. She just huffed and walked out, leaving me alone again. I realized then that no matter how much I tried, I would always be an outsider in this house. My presence was tolerated, not welcomed. And with Mark away, the thin veneer of family harmony was quickly unraveling. The day started like any other, but it turned into the worst day of my life. I was in my room, headphones on, when Anna barged in without knocking. Your phone's been ringing off the hook, she said, her voice unusually somber. I pulled off my headphones, feeling a knot in my stomach. Who is it? I asked, reaching for my phone. It's Mark's company, she replied, avoiding my gaze. My hands trembled as I answered the call. The voice on the other end was calm, but the words were like a sledgehammer. There's been an accident. Mark's plane. I'm so sorry. The phone slipped from my hand, clattering to the floor. My whole world collapsed in that moment. Mark, my husband, my best friend, gone. I don't remember much after that. I vaguely recall Mrs. Thompson and Anna in the living room, their voices a distant echo. Did you hear about Mark? Mrs. Thompson's voice was flat, almost emotionless. Yeah, what a shame. But you know, with his job, it was always a risk, Anna replied, her tone too casual for the gravity of the situation. Their words felt like a betrayal. Where was the grief? The loss? It was as if Mark was just an inconvenience removed from their lives. In the days that followed, I was a ghost in the house, barely eating, barely existing. Mark's funeral was a blur. I remember standing there, feeling the weight of my loneliness, surrounded by people who were supposed to be family. But a new shock awaited me. Amidst my sorrow, I discovered I was pregnant. The news brought a confusing mix of joy and heartache. A part of Mark was still with me, yet he'd never know. After the funeral, Mrs. Thompson's true colors shone brighter than ever. Rose, we need to talk about the house, she said, her voice cold and calculating. I looked at her, not comprehending. What about the house? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. You can't stay here anymore. Now that Mark's gone, there's no reason for you to be here, she stated bluntly. I felt the room spin. But this was my home with Mark, I protested weakly. Was. Past tense. You need to find somewhere else to live, she said, her eyes void of any sympathy. Anna chimed in. Yeah, Rose, it's time to move on. You don't really belong here anyway. I need to tell you something, I began, my voice shaky. I'm pregnant. Mark was going to be a father. Their reaction was nothing like I expected. Mrs. Thompson scoffed. Pregnant? That's convenient. Trying to find a reason to stay here, are you? Anna joined in. Yeah, right. As if we'd believe that. You just don't want to leave. I stood there, stunned. Their words stung more than I could express. It's true, I insisted, my voice barely above a whisper, but they just laughed it off. I packed my bags in a daze, each item a reminder of the life I had lost. As I was about to leave, I turned to them. You're kicking me out at the worst time of my life. How can you be so cruel? Mrs. Thompson looked at me, her expression unmoved. Life's tough. You better learn that fast. With nowhere to go, I left the house, each step away feeling like a descent into an unknown abyss. The future was a dark void, and I was walking into it alone. A month had passed since Mark's funeral, and I was living with Aunt Sarah, his kind-hearted aunt who had taken me in. The grief was still raw, but life had to go on, especially now that I was pregnant. I was in the middle of a web design project when Aunt Sarah called me from the living room. Rose, there's a call for you. Sounds important. Curious, I answered the phone. Hello, this is Rose. Mrs. Thompson, I'm John from Greenfield Notary. I'm calling about your late husband's last affairs, the voice on the other end said. My heart skipped a beat. What about them? I asked. Your husband had a life insurance policy, and you're the sole beneficiary. It's a substantial amount, John explained. I felt a mix of shock and relief. How much are we talking about? I inquired, trying to keep my voice steady. It's quite a large sum, Ms. Rose. Enough to secure a good future for you and your child, he replied. I hung up the phone, my mind racing. This money could change everything. I could start a new life, provide for my baby, maybe even move to a place of our own. I shared the news with Aunt Sarah. That's wonderful, Rose. Mark always was thoughtful. He's taken care of you even now, she said, her eyes moist. The news of the insurance money spread quickly, and it wasn't long before Mrs. Thompson called. Rose, I heard about the insurance. We need to talk, she said, her tone insistent. I braced myself. What about it, Mrs. Thompson? You know, since you're the beneficiary, I think it's only fair that you share some of that money with us. After all, we're Mark's family too, she demanded. I couldn't believe her audacity. Share the money? After you kicked me out when I needed you the most? I replied, my voice firm. Well, we have expenses too, and you're living off my son's money, she retorted. That money is for me and my child, Mrs. Thompson. I won't give you a dime, I said, the resolve in my voice surprising even me. Think about it, Rose. Don't be selfish, she said before hanging up. But I had made up my mind. I was going to use that money to start a new life, far from the judgment and cruelty of Mrs. Thompson and Anna. I began looking for apartments, something cozy and welcoming, a place where I could raise my child in peace. The thought of having my own space, a sanctuary for me and my baby, filled me with hope. 6 months into my pregnancy, I was finally settling into my new apartment. It was a small, cozy place, filled with the promise of new beginnings. I had just finished setting up the baby's crib when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I was surprised to see Mrs. Thompson and Anna standing at my door when I opened it. Rose, we need to talk, Mrs. Thompson said, pushing past me into the apartment. Anna followed her, eyeing the place with a mix of curiosity and disdain. Nice little spot you got here, she remarked, her tone laced with envy. What are you doing here? I asked, trying to mask my discomfort. Mrs. Thompson took a deep breath. We've been thinking about how things ended between us. We want to apologize. I was taken aback. Apologize? After you threw me out? Anna chimed in. Look, Rose, we were upset. But we're family, right? We should stick together. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Family? You made it clear I was no longer part of your family. Mrs. Thompson glanced at my swollen belly and her tone softened. We didn't know about the baby. We want to make things right. I scoffed. Now that you see I'm actually pregnant, you suddenly care? It's not just that, Anna said quickly. Things have been tough since you left. We thought maybe you could come back. Help out. I stared at them, incredulous. You want me to come back after everything? Mrs. Thompson took a step forward. We need your help, Rose. Financially, we're struggling. I shook my head in disbelief. So, this isn't about making amends. You just need money. Anna's face hardened. Look, Rose, we all have to make sacrifices. You have the means to help the family. I felt a surge of anger. I am not your family. Not anymore. You made that clear when you kicked me out. Mrs. Thompson's expression faltered. Rose, please. Think of it as helping for the sake of your child's grandparents. I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. Grandparents? You never once acted like grandparents. You won't see a cent from me. And you certainly won't be a part of my child's life. The realization dawned on their faces. They had hoped for an easy solution to their problems, but I was no longer the same person they had once manipulated. Anna tried a different approach. Rose, be reasonable. It's not good to hold grudges, especially in your condition. My condition has nothing to do with this. You made your bed, now lie in it, I said firmly. Defeated, Mrs. Thompson turned towards the door. You'll regret this, Rose. Family is everything. As they left, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. They had come expecting to find the same vulnerable girl they had once known, but I had grown stronger, more resilient. I looked around my apartment, at the little crib that awaited my child, and I knew I had made the right decision. My future, and my child's future, was here, in this new life I had built for us. Living in my own space, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in a long time. My pregnancy was advancing well, and I was busy preparing for my new role as a mother. One evening, as I was browsing online for baby supplies, my phone rang. It was Aunt Sarah. Rose, have you heard the latest about the Thompsons? She asked, her voice tinged with a mix of concern and disbelief. No, what happened? I replied, pausing my browsing. They're selling the house. Apparently, they're in deep financial trouble, Aunt Sarah informed me. I was stunned. The house? But that's been in their family for years. Seems like they can't afford to keep it anymore. Anna's husband lost his job, and without your financial contribution, they've hit rock bottom, she explained. I felt a strange mix of vindication and pity. I can't believe they're selling the house. Where will they go? From what I heard, they're moving into a much smaller place. Anna is not taking it well. She's had to get a job at a local store, Aunt Sarah said. The news hit me unexpectedly. Anna, who had always looked down on anyone who worked a regular job, was now working in retail. Wow, that's a big change for her, I said, trying to process the information. Yeah, she's been complaining to anyone who'll listen. But, you know, maybe this will be a good lesson for her. A bit of hard work never hurt anyone, Aunt Sarah added. I thought about how much my life had changed since leaving the Thompson house. I guess we all get what we deserve eventually, I mused. We chatted a bit more before saying our goodbyes. I sat back and thought about the twist of fate. Mrs. Thompson and Anna, once so proud and unyielding, were now facing their own struggles. It was a harsh reality, but one that seemed fitting given how they had treated me. I had learned the hard way that kindness and compassion were invaluable, and their absence could lead to a fall from grace. As I resumed browsing for baby items, I felt a renewed sense of gratitude for the life I was building. My journey had been tough, but it led me to a place of independence and inner strength. The day I brought my son, Leo, home marked the start of a beautiful yet challenging journey. He was a bundle of joy, his tiny fingers wrapping around mine, bringing a sense of purpose and love I had never known. As I watched him sleep peacefully in his crib, I thought about returning to my work as a web designer. Aunt Sarah had been my rock through all the upheaval, always there to offer support and wisdom. "You're going to balance this just fine, Rose," she reassured me one evening as we sat in the living room, Leo cradled in my arms. "You're strong, and you've got a good head on your shoulders." I smiled, grateful for her encouragement. "Thanks, Aunt Sarah. I just want to give Leo the best life possible." It was during one of these peaceful afternoons that my phone rang, shattering the calm. The caller ID showed Anna's number, a name I hadn't seen in months. With a deep breath, I answered, bracing myself. "Rose, you need to give us money. You're living all posh while we're scraping by." Anna's voice was sharp, tinged with desperation. I was taken aback by her blunt demand. "Anna, I'm not responsible for your financial situation. I have my own family to take care of now." "You always think you're better than us, don't you? Just because you got that insurance money," she retorted, her voice rising. "I've just given birth to a child, Anna. My focus is on my son now," I replied, trying to keep my composure. "I don't care about your kid. We need that money, Rose," she yelled into the phone. I felt a surge of anger and disbelief. How could she be so heartless? Without another word, I hung up the phone and immediately blocked her number. The nerve of her, demanding money and disregarding the fact that I was a new mother, struggling with my own challenges. Aunt Sarah, who had overheard the conversation, put a comforting hand on my shoulder. "Don't let her get to you, Rose. You're doing what's best for you and Leo." I nodded, still shaken by the call. I just can't believe she would stoop so low. "It's unfortunate, but some people only think of themselves. You just focus on your baby and your work. You're doing great," Aunt Sarah encouraged. As I rocked Leo in my arms, I realized that this was my world now. My son, my work, and the new life I was building. No amount of guilt-tripping or demands from my past could take that away from me. I looked down at Leo, his innocent eyes slowly drifting closed, and whispered a promise to him. "We're going to be just fine, little one. Just you and me, and all the love in the world." Life with my newborn son, Leo, was a beautiful, if sometimes exhausting, adventure. Balancing motherhood and my web design business from home was challenging, but I found joy in every little moment with him. Aunt Sarah, my late husband's aunt, would often come over to help, her presence a constant comfort in my new life as a single mom. One sunny afternoon, I decided to take Leo for a walk in his stroller. The fresh air was good for both of us, and I enjoyed these quiet moments, walking through the neighborhood. On a whim, I decided to stop by a small store to pick up some essentials. As I maneuvered the stroller through the aisles, I spotted a familiar face. It was Anna, my sister-in-law, working as a salesperson. Her mother, Mrs. Thompson, was with her, and they were deep in conversation. I couldn't help but notice the stark contrast from the last time I saw them. Their clothes were worn and plain, far from the well-kept appearance they used to maintain. They looked tired, almost defeated. I paused for a moment, wondering if I should approach them, but they saw me first. Their faces changed instantly, a mix of surprise, embarrassment, and a hint of disdain. Neither of them made a move to speak to me, and I decided it was best to leave it that way. I continued my shopping, keeping my distance. I could feel their eyes on me as I moved through the store, but I focused on Leo, who was babbling happily in his stroller. As I left the store, I couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed. The last time I had seen Anna and Mrs. Thompson, they were in a completely different position, looking down on me from their perceived higher status. Now, the tables had turned. Not that I took any pleasure in their misfortune, but it was a stark reminder of how quickly life could change. Back home, as I fed Leo and played with him, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. It had been filled with ups and downs, but I had come out stronger, more resilient. I had a beautiful son, a career I was passionate about, and the support of Aunt Sarah. That evening, as I put Leo to bed, I whispered a promise to him. I'll always be here for you, my little one. We'll make our own way, no matter what life throws at us.
In our cozy little home, life often felt like a well-orchestrated symphony, each day flowing into the next with a comforting regularity. I'm Eliza, a dedicated dentist whose life revolves around caring for others, both in my clinic and at home. My husband, Tom, a man whose past life had etched lines of worry and contemplation on his face, was often my partner in quiet evenings spent discussing everything and nothing. This particular evening, however, held a different tune. As I entered our home, the aroma of simmering stew greeted me, a sign of Tom's attempt to provide some culinary comfort. I found him in the kitchen, looking more troubled than usual. "Hey love, what's cooking?" I asked, trying to inject some lightness into the heavy air. Tom glanced up, managing a weak smile. "Just some stew." "Eliza, we need to talk about something important." "It's about Alex." Alex, Tom's son from his previous marriage, lived with his mother in a different city. Our interactions were limited to brief, somewhat formal exchanges on Skype, his shy demeanor never allowing me to know him beyond the basic pleasantries. "What about Alex? Is he okay?" I queried, concern lacing my voice as I took a seat at the kitchen table. Tom joined me, his hands clasped together, the weight of his words gathering like storm clouds. "He's fine, health-wise. But he's been given a chance to follow his dream of forming a band. He's really passionate about it, Eliza. But, well, he needs our financial help." I leaned in, listening intently. "How much does he need?" I asked, my mind already sifting through our finances. Tom hesitated, then uttered, "Around $10,000. It's for the equipment, some studio time, things like that." I took a deep breath, the number settling in my mind. "That's a significant amount, Tom. But if it's for his dream, tell me, have you seen any of his work? Is he serious about this path?" He nodded vigorously. "I've heard some of his music during our calls. He spends every spare moment he has on it. I believe in him, Eliza." I watched the earnest look in his eyes, a father's love mingling with hope. "All right, Tom. If you believe this is right, I trust your judgment. Let's support Alex. But, let's also ensure it's a wise decision. We should probably have a chat with him, understand his plan a little better." Tom's face lit up with a mixture of relief and gratitude. "Thank you, Eliza. This means the world to him, and to me. And yes, let's arrange a call with him soon." As we sat there planning our next steps, I couldn't help but feel a mixture of excitement and apprehension. I was about to invest in a dream, in a young man I barely knew, hoping that our contribution would set him on a path to success and fulfillment. It was a risk, but perhaps, in the grand scheme of things, a risk worth taking for family. Months slipped by after the first financial aid for Tom's son, Alex. Life resumed its usual pace with my dental practice bustling and Tom's work steady. Then one evening, as autumn leaves began to paint the ground in hues of amber and gold, Tom approached me with a familiar hesitancy in his eyes. "Eliza, can we talk about something?" he asked, his voice carrying an edge of discomfort. I nodded, setting aside the book I was reading. "Of course, what's on your mind?" He took a deep breath, his gaze avoiding mine. "It's about Alex again. He's making great progress with his music, really diving into it. But he needs more support, another $10,000. I felt a twinge of surprise, my eyebrows knitting together in concern. "Another $10,000? But we just provided for his initial setup. What does he need this time?" Tom's fingers fidgeted with the hem of his shirt. "He's looking to upgrade some equipment, maybe get into a better studio. It's just that, things are getting more serious for him now." I sighed, a sense of unease settling in. Tom, I understand wanting to support Alex, but we need to be mindful. We're talking about a lot of money here. I earn well, but these are hard-earned savings. We need to think about our future too. Tom's face turned a shade darker, his voice raising slightly. But it's for Alex, Eliza. My son. Don't you think he deserves this chance? His tone stung, a hint of accusation lingering in the air. Of course, I do, I replied, my voice firm yet calm. But I also believe in responsible support. We can't just keep handing out money without understanding the full picture. The conversation grew heated, our words a volley of concern and frustration. Then, suddenly, Tom's demeanor shifted from defensive to outright angry. You just don't understand, Eliza. You're not a parent. You don't know what it's like to want to give everything to your child. His words cut deep, echoing around the room. I recoiled, hurt flashing in my eyes. Tom, that's unfair. I've been nothing but supportive. But we can't be reckless. And your son is almost an adult, he needs to learn financial responsibility too. Tom shook his head, his anger boiling over. You're just being selfish and greedy, Eliza. You don't understand what family means. With that, he stormed out of the house, leaving me in a stunned silence. His accusations felt like a slap, the word greedy reverberating in my mind. I sat there, trying to piece together the fragments of our conversation, the harmony of our life now disturbed by a growing discord. Days turned into a week, and Tom's absence stretched on. I was left to ponder the situation alone, my concern for Alex's future wrestling with my dismay at Tom's reaction. When Tom finally returned, his demeanor had softened, but the underlying issue remained unresolved. I'm sorry, Eliza, he said, his voice low. I shouldn't have exploded like that. It's just, I want to do right by Alex. I nodded, accepting his apology but feeling the distance between us. I understand, Tom. But we need to be a team in this, especially when it comes to big decisions. Reluctantly, I agreed to the additional support for Alex, my heart heavy with apprehension. Tom's immediate switch back to his affectionate self was a relief, but also a reminder of the fragile balance we were treading. The cycle of financial requests for Tom's son had become a recurring theme, straining not just our bank account, but also the very fabric of our relationship. Just as the leaves began to shift to the fiery colors of fall, Tom approached me again, his demeanor more desperate than before. Eliza, we need to talk about Alex again, he began, avoiding my gaze. I set down my book, a sense of dread filling the air. What is it this time, Tom? He fidgeted, clearly uncomfortable. It's a big opportunity for him, a chance to go on a tour with his band. He needs our help, Eliza. He needs $30,000. I was taken aback, the figure echoing in my mind like a bad joke. 30,000? Tom, this is getting out of hand. We've been supportive, but this is too much. Tom's face flushed with frustration. But it's for his future, Eliza. Can't you see? He could make it big. I stood up, feeling the tension like a physical force between us. And I want to support him, but not blindly. We've never even seen him play. We don't know if this band is real or just a whim. We need some kind of proof, Tom. His voice raised, a note of panic creeping in. Why can't you just trust me, Eliza? Why do you need proof for everything? I replied, my own voice rising in response. Because trust is based on honesty and responsibility, Tom. And right now, I'm not seeing a lot of either. The room was thick with unsaid words and mounting frustrations. Tom then dropped a bombshell that shattered any semblance of normalcy. If you don't give this money for Alex, I don't think I can stay in this marriage. I felt as if the floor had fallen out beneath me. Are you blackmailing me, Tom? Using our marriage as a bargaining chip for money? He didn't answer, his silence speaking volumes. I realized then that our issues ran deeper than I had ever imagined. This was about more than money, it was about respect, trust, and the balance of power in our relationship. "I need time to think," I said finally, my voice hollow. "This isn't something I can decide right now." Tom stormed out, leaving me alone with my swirling thoughts. I knew something had to change. We couldn't continue down this path of ultimatums and financial demands. That night, as I lay in bed, the space beside me cold and empty, I realized that I was at a crossroads. One path led to giving in to Tom's demands, sacrificing my principles and possibly my financial security. The other was fraught with the unknown, potentially leading to the end of my marriage. In the quiet of our home, I sat down with my laptop, a sense of unease stirring within me as I navigated to Alex's Instagram page. The images that greeted me were far from what I expected of a struggling musician. Lavish parties, designer clothes, exotic locations, it all painted a picture of luxury that belied the story we'd been told. I needed answers directly from Alex. I called him on Skype, ensuring the video recording was on, ready to confront him about the inconsistencies. He answered, his face a mask of casual indifference. "Alex, we need to talk about the money your dad and I have been sending you," I began, my tone firm. He shrugged nonchalantly. "What about it?" I didn't mince words. "I've seen your Instagram. Your lifestyle doesn't match up with needing money for a band." "I'm not sending any more money." His face changed then, the cool facade slipping into something darker. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. I have connections, people that can make life very unpleasant for you." I felt a chill at his threat, but I didn't waver. "Alex, I've been recording this conversation. Threatening me is a serious offense. I can take this to the police." The bravado drained from his face, leaving behind a pale, frightened boy. Tears welled up in his eyes as he realized the gravity of his actions. "Please, no. I was just talking big. I'm not in any gang. I don't want any trouble with the police." His sudden shift from intimidation to desperation made me pause. He was on the verge of revealing something more, something that might explain the bizarre turn of events. Sitting back, I watched Alex's face, tear-streaked and pale, as he prepared to spill the secrets he'd been holding on to. "All right, Alex, let's hear it then. What's going on?" Through sobs, Alex began to unravel the web of lies. "It started off small, just me wanting some extra cash. But then I found something about Dad." I leaned forward, my heart pounding. "What did you find about your dad, Alex?" He wiped his eyes, taking a shaky breath. "I found out he was seeing someone, not just anyone, someone from his past. I took pictures, threatened to tell you unless he kept sending money." My world spun with his confession. "Tom has been unfaithful? And you've been blackmailing him?" Alex nodded miserably. "Yes. I never meant for it to get this far. I wanted to live a certain way, and when I found out about Dad, it seemed like an easy way to keep the money coming." I felt a mix of anger and pity. "Alex, do you realize how serious this is? Blackmail is a crime. And your father, how could he?" He sniffled, looking down. I know it's messed up. I don't know, I got in too deep. But I swear, Eliza, I don't want to cause any more trouble. I'll stop. I'll figure something else out." I sighed, the weight of the situation heavy on my shoulders. "And the band, the tours, all of that was just a lie?" He nodded again. "Yeah. I'm sorry. I like music, sure, but there was no band. I just needed a story for the money." I sat back, processing everything. My husband had been unfaithful, my stepson a blackmailer. The foundation of my family was cracked and broken. "Alex, I need to talk to your father about this. And you need to sort yourself out. This isn't the way to go through life." He nodded, a small glimmer of understanding in his eyes. I know. I'm sorry, Eliza. Really. As the call ended, I was left in a silent house, the echo of Alex's confessions ringing in my ears. The lies were unraveling, revealing a painful truth I could no longer ignore. I knew the next step was confronting Tom, but a part of me dreaded what that confrontation would bring. The man I had built a life with was a stranger, and our marriage a facade. I needed to gather my strength, for the conversation ahead would be the most challenging of my life. The house felt unbearably quiet as I waited for Tom to return. The ticking of the clock seemed to echo my racing heart, each minute stretching longer than the last. When I finally heard the turn of the key in the lock, my stomach knotted with anxiety. Tom entered, immediately sensing the storm brewing in the air. Eliza, what's wrong? You look like you're about to explode. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Tom, we need to talk. Now. He hesitated, then nodded, taking a seat across from me. What's it about? I didn't beat around the bush. It's about Alex, Tom. And it's about you. I know everything, the blackmail, the affair. Alex confessed. Tom's face paled, his eyes widening in shock. What? Eliza, I can explain. I felt a surge of anger. Explain? How can you possibly explain lying to me, allowing your son to blackmail you, and using our money to cover up your affair? He looked down, shame etched across his face. I was afraid, Eliza. Afraid of losing you. I thought I could control the situation, but it spiraled out of control. I shook my head, my voice rising. Control? You call this control? You've been living a double life, Tom. And all the while, lying to my face. Tom's voice broke. I'm sorry, Eliza. I never meant for any of this to happen. I didn't know how to handle it. I stood up, my hands trembling with a mixture of fury and heartbreak. Sorry doesn't cut it, Tom. Your son was threatening me, using gang connections to intimidate me because of your mistakes. Tom stood as well, reaching out to me. Please, Eliza, let's try to work this out. I'll do anything. I pushed his hand away. Work this out? How can I possibly trust you again? How can we go back to how things were knowing what I know now? He had no answer, just stood there, a man broken by his own deceit. I knew then that our marriage was beyond repair. The trust that once bound us together had been shattered by lies and blackmail. Tom, I need you to leave, I said, my voice cold and final. He didn't argue, just nodded silently and walked out, the door closing with a soft click that seemed to echo the closing chapter of our life together. As I sat back down, alone in the echoing silence of our home, I felt a profound sense of loss and betrayal. But amidst the pain, there was also a flicker of relief. The truth was out, painful as it was, and now I could begin to heal, to rebuild my life on a foundation of honesty and self-respect. In the aftermath of our confrontation, the house felt empty, the silence a constant reminder of the betrayal and deceit that had unfolded. I knew I couldn't just let things end there. There needed to be consequences for the lies and the financial manipulation. It was time for a legal reckoning. I found myself sitting across from a lawyer, my hands clenched tightly in my lap. Mrs. Johnson, I've gone through all the information you provided, he began, his tone professional yet sympathetic. I need to pursue legal action, I stated firmly. Not just for the divorce, but for the recovery of the money Tom used for his blackmail payments, and for the emotional distress this has caused me. The lawyer nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. We can certainly file for divorce on grounds of infidelity and emotional distress. As for the money, we'll need all the evidence you have of the transactions and any communication between you and your husband or stepson regarding this matter. I assured him I had kept meticulous records. I trusted Tom completely. Never thought I'd need these as evidence against him, I admitted, a sad irony in my voice. He offered a small, reassuring smile. You're doing the right thing by protecting yourself and your assets. This won't be easy, but I'll be with you every step of the way. The following weeks were a blur of legal documents, meetings, and court appearances. Tom looked defeated each time our paths crossed, the reality of his actions finally hitting home. At one such encounter, he approached me, his expression one of regret. Eliza, I never wanted it to come to this. I'm sorry. I looked at him, the man I once loved, now a stranger. Sorry isn't enough, Tom. You made your choices, and now we're both living with the consequences. The final court session was the hardest. I sat there, listening as my lawyer laid out the case, detailing the emotional and financial toll of Tom's deceit. When the judge finally spoke, granting me the divorce along with compensation for the misused funds and emotional suffering, I felt a bittersweet relief. As I walked out of the courtroom, the weight of the past months felt both heavier and lighter. I had stood up for myself, faced the legal battle, and emerged with a sense of closure, albeit a painful one. But the journey wasn't over. There were still pieces of my life to pick up, a future to rebuild. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but as I stepped out into the sunlight, I felt a glimmer of hope. I decided to visit my old friend and confidant, Martha, who had been a pillar of support through my ordeal. As I entered her cozy living room, she greeted me with a warm, knowing smile. Eliza, look at you. How are you holding up? She asked, ushering me to sit. I sighed, a small smile playing on my lips. I'm okay, Martha. It's been tough, but I feel like I'm finally seeing the light at the end of this long, dark tunnel. Martha patted my hand gently. You've been through so much, my dear. But you handled it with such grace and strength. I'm proud of you. I nodded, feeling a sense of pride myself. It was hard, Martha, facing Tom in court, unraveling all the lies. But I stood up for myself. And now, it's time for a new beginning. Martha's eyes twinkled with encouragement. So, what's next for Eliza Johnson? I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the question. First, I think I need some time to heal, to rediscover who I am outside of this whole mess. Then, I want to focus on my work, maybe even take a vacation, something I haven't done in years. Sounds like a plan, Martha replied warmly. And remember, Eliza, this is your chance to rewrite your story, on your own terms. Her words resonated within me. Yes, I had been through a storm, but now I had the opportunity to chart my own course. In the following weeks, I immersed myself in work and self-care. I took up yoga, started reading more, and even planned a solo trip to a place I'd always wanted to visit. Life without Tom was different, but it was mine to shape. One evening, as I was preparing for my trip, the doorbell rang. It was Alex. He stood there, looking nervous and remorseful. Eliza, I just wanted to say I'm sorry, face to face. For everything, he stammered. I regarded him, seeing not the aggressive young man from our Skype call, but a remorseful, lost boy. Thank you, Alex. I hope you've learned from this, and that you're making changes for the better. He nodded earnestly. I am. And I owe it to you for standing up to me. You helped me see how wrong I was. I smiled slightly, acknowledging his apology. Take care of yourself, Alex. And make good choices, okay? As he walked away, I closed the door and turned back to my own path, feeling a sense of closure. The journey had been arduous, but I emerged stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever lay ahead. The sun set in a blaze of glory, its vibrant hues a promise of the new chapter awaiting me. A chapter of healing, growth, and self-discovery. A new horizon was before me, and I stepped forward with determination and hope, ready to embrace whatever the future held. I'm Zoe, a 28-year-old librarian with a past that reads more like a thriller than a quiet bookworm's life. I grew up in a neighborhood that taught me more about survival than any school could. I became a state champion in lightweight boxing and martial arts, not just for trophies, but to stand my ground. They called me Riptide back then, 'cause I was calm until I wasn't, and then I swept everything away. I remember the day I met Alex. It started like any other, with me shelving books and daydreaming between the quiet aisles of the library. But as I left work that day, some wannabe tough guys decided I was an easy target. That's when Alex stepped in, all chivalry and bravado. "Hey, leave her alone," he shouted, stepping between me and them. I rolled my eyes, knowing well I could handle it, but I appreciated the gesture. The thugs laughed. "What are you gonna do about it?" one sneered. Before I knew it, fists were flying. Alex took a hit, and that's when I stepped in. My training kicked in, and within minutes, the thugs were running away, nursing more than their pride. Alex was on the ground, nursing a busted lip. "Wow, that was amazing," he exclaimed, blood and awe mixing in his voice. "I'm Alex, by the way." "Zoe," I replied, offering him a hand up. From that day, we were inseparable. His parents welcomed me with open arms, his mother always saying, "You're the daughter I never had." His father would chuckle, "Well, she's certainly the protector we never knew we needed." But not everyone was a fan. Mark, Alex's younger brother, was different. The first time I met him, he sneered at my job. "A librarian, huh?" he scoffed. "What do you do, read all day?" I shrugged. "And keep the world of knowledge safe for the likes of you." He laughed, a harsh sound. "I prefer my women with a bit more edge." I raised an eyebrow. "Trust me, I've got more edge than you can handle." We left it at that, an uneasy truce between us. But I could tell, this was just the beginning of our story, one that would challenge me in ways I never expected. I went home that night, the house quiet except for the sound of Alex cooking in the kitchen. The smell of spaghetti wafted through the air, a simple pleasure after a long day. "You wouldn't believe the day I had," I started, but he turned, a smile wiping away any fatigue. "Let me guess, another round with the encyclopedia set?" "Something like that," I laughed. We settled into our routine, a peaceful life punctuated by the echoes of my past. I didn't know then how much my old life would come crashing back into my new one, but for now, I was content. I had found a new beginning, a chance at a life I never thought I'd have. First Alex's father passed away, then his mother fell asleep and did not wake up. After the dust had settled with Alex's parents passing, we found ourselves navigating a new normal. They had left us a small, cozy house in a decent part of town, while Mark ended up with an apartment across the city. It seemed like things might calm down, but that was wishful thinking. I remember the day Mark showed up unannounced with his new wife, Lisa. She was a whirlwind of attitude and ink, her tattoos trailing down her arms like battle scars. I was in the middle of sorting through some old boxes when they barged in. "Hey, look what the cat dragged in," Mark announced with a smirk. Lisa stood behind him, chewing gum loudly, her eyes scanning the house like she owned the place. "Nice digs you got here," Lisa said, her voice dripping with a mix of admiration and disdain. I stood up, wiping my hands on my jeans. "Thanks, we like it. And you are?" She laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "I'm Lisa, Mark's better half. And by better, I mean way better." I couldn't help but chuckle. "Well, Lisa, welcome to our home. Just try not to break anything, including Mark." Mark rolled his eyes. "Always the joker, huh, Zoe? But seriously, this place is way too nice for a couple of bookworms. You should see the dump we're in." Lisa chimed in. "Yeah, we were thinking, maybe we could swap, you know? You take the apartment, and we take this little paradise." Alex, who had been quiet until then, laughed. "I think we'll keep what's ours, thanks." The conversation was tense, the air thick with unspoken challenges. Lisa strutted around the house, her every move calculated to intimidate. But I wasn't one to back down. "Listen, Lisa," I started, my voice steady. This is our home, and you're welcome as family, but don't overstep. We all got to live our own lives." She snapped her gum and stared me down. "Oh, I'm just getting started, honey. I like a challenge, and this place," she gestured around, "is going to be mine." The audacity was almost laughable. Almost. I exchanged a look with Alex, who shook his head slightly, a silent message to let it go for now. They didn't stay long after that, but the tension lingered like a bad smell. After they left, Alex and I sat down in the living room, the silence between us heavy. "Can you believe them?" I finally said, breaking the quiet. Alex sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Mark's always been a handful, but Lisa, she's something else." "I can handle her," I said, more to myself than to him. "I've dealt with worse." But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, that encounter marked the beginning of a series of events that would test our patience and our resolve. Lisa's bold claim on our home wasn't just idle talk. It was a declaration of war, and we were right in the crosshairs. The trouble began in small, annoying ways at first. I'd wake up to find trash thrown over our fence or nasty words spray-painted on the side of the house. "Get out," they'd say, or "not welcome." It was juvenile, but it set me on edge. I had a feeling Lisa was behind it, a suspicion that was confirmed when things escalated. One morning, I found a dead bird lying on our doorstep, a twisted warning. I remember standing there, staring down at it, the anger boiling inside me. I scooped it up with a shovel, my mind racing with dark thoughts. I decided to let it slide for the moment, but then Lisa took it a step further. She came strutting into the library one afternoon, a smug look on her face. I was reshelving books, and she made a beeline straight for me. "Hey, book nerd," she called out, loud enough for everyone to hear. I turned, keeping my face neutral. "Can I help you?" She smirked, her eyes glinting with malice. "Just wanted to see where the famous Zoe spends her days. Quite the boring life you've got here, huh?" I shrugged, trying to keep it cool. "It's a living." "What do you want, Lisa?" She leaned in close, her breath reeking of cigarettes. "Just a friendly visit. But let me give you a little advice. Give up the house, and all this," she gestured around, "stops." Simple as that. Before I could reply, she started knocking books off the shelves, her laughter echoing in the quiet room. I grabbed her arm, stopping her. "Enough, Lisa. Leave now, or I'll call the cops." She yanked her arm free, still smirking. "You wouldn't dare." "See you around, Zoe." I spent the next hour picking up books, my mind a whirlwind of anger and frustration. I wanted to fight back, to put her in her place, but I remembered my promise to stay calm. I couldn't let her see she got to me. That evening, I called Mark, hoping maybe he'd see reason. "Mark, your wife's out of control. She came into the library today, caused a scene. It's got to stop," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. There was a pause, and then he laughed. Zoe, always so dramatic. Lisa's just having a bit of fun. But I'll tell you what, you give us the house, and I'll make sure she leaves you alone." I clenched my fist, feeling the old fire rise. "That's not going to happen, Mark. Control your wife, or I'll take matters into my own hands." He scoffed. "Big words, Zoe. Just remember, you started this." We hung up, the threat hanging heavy in the air. I didn't tell Alex about the call, not wanting to worry him more than necessary. But I knew things were about to get a lot worse. It was only a matter of time before Lisa or Mark made their next move, and I had to be ready. The tension was like a thick fog, hanging over our home and seeping into every corner. I could feel it, a constant reminder that things were far from okay. It wasn't just the vandalism or the threats anymore. It was the waiting, the not knowing when or what would come next. One evening, as I walked home from the library, my nerves were on high alert. The streets were unusually quiet, the silence amplifying my anxiety. That's when I saw him, Mark, staggering down the sidewalk towards me, a bottle in one hand and a look of drunken fury on his face. "Hey, Zoe," he slurred, his words soaked in alcohol. "Thought you could ignore me, huh?" I stopped, my heart pounding. "Mark, go home. You're drunk." He sneered, taking a step closer. "This is my family's home you're living in. You don't belong here." Before I could react, he swung at me, his fist cutting through the air. Instinct took over. I dodged his blow and grabbed his arm, twisting it behind him. He yelped in pain, his knees buckling. "Listen to me, Mark," I hissed, my voice low and steady. "I don't want to hurt you, but I will defend myself." He struggled, trying to break free, but I held firm. "You're nothing, Zoe. A nobody." With a quick movement, I pushed him to the ground, his body hitting the pavement with a thud. He lay there, whimpering, the fight gone out of him. "Stay away from us, Mark," I warned, my voice cold. "Next time, I won't be so gentle." I left him there, the night, swallowing his curses and threats. As I walked the rest of the way home, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. It was one thing to deal with words and petty acts of vandalism, but this was different. Mark had crossed a line, and I knew it was only a matter of time before things escalated even further. Alex was waiting for me when I got home, his face etched with concern. "Where have you been? I've been worried sick." I sighed, the weight of the evening pressing down on me. Ran into Mark. It got a little heated. Alex's eyes widened. "What happened? Are you okay?" I nodded, trying to reassure him. "I'm fine. Just tired of all this, tired of being pushed around." He wrapped his arms around me, a silent promise of support. "We'll figure this out, Zoe. Together." But as we stood there, clinging to each other, I couldn't shake the feeling that our troubles were far from over. I had reached my breaking point, and there was no turning back. I was ready to do whatever it took to protect our home, to protect our peace. And if that meant facing down the demons of my past, then so be it. I was no stranger to fighting, and I wasn't about to start backing down now. The days that followed were a blur of unease and whispered conversations. The incident with Mark had shaken me more than I wanted to admit. I knew I had to tell Alex everything, but part of me dreaded his reaction. Would he see me differently, knowing the full extent of the violence I was capable of? When Alex finally came home from his trip, I was a bundle of nerves. He looked tired, the lines on his face deeper than when he left. He dropped his bags and pulled me into a hug, a silent question in his embrace. "Zoe, what's wrong?" he asked, his voice laced with worry. "You're shaking." I took a deep breath, the words tumbling out. "It's Mark and Lisa. They've been terrorizing us, and it's getting worse." His brow furrowed, confusion and anger mixing in his eyes. "What do you mean? What happened?" I told him everything, from the dead bird to the confrontation with Mark. With each word, I saw the shock and hurt flash across his face. "You've been dealing with this alone? Why didn't you tell me?" Alex's voice cracked, a mix of anger and concern. "I didn't want to worry you, and I thought I could handle it," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Zoe, we're in this together. You don't have to carry this burden alone." I nodded, the guilt and relief swirling inside me. "I know. I'm sorry. I didn't want you to see this side of me. The side that fights, that hurts people." Alex took my hand, his grip firm. "I married you for all of you, Zoe. Your strength, your courage, it's part of who you are. And I love you for it." We talked late into the night, making plans and discussing our options. But underneath the strategy and determination, there was an unspoken fear. What if it wasn't enough? What if Lisa and Mark didn't back down? The next morning, I woke up to the sound of Alex on the phone, his voice low and urgent. I walked into the kitchen, catching snippets of his conversation. "Can't go on like this. We need to take action," he was saying. "I'll call the lawyer, see what our options are." He hung up and turned to me, a determined look on his face. "We're going to fight this, Zoe. Legally, and if necessary, we'll take other precautions. But we're not letting them win." I nodded, the fighter in me rising to the surface. "I'm with you, Alex. Whatever it takes." But even as we banded together, ready to defend our home, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. Confessing to Alex had lifted a weight off my shoulders, but it also made the threat more real. This was no longer a distant danger, it was at our doorstep, and we were about to face it head-on. The battle lines were drawn, and there was no turning back. The quiet life we had built was about to be tested, and I only hoped that our love and resolve would be enough to see us through. One brisk morning, as Alex and I were enjoying a rare moment of quiet, a loud knock shattered the peace. We exchanged a wary glance before I opened the door. There stood Mark and Lisa, flanked by a group of guys with a rough, gangster edge. Lisa's smug grin told me everything I needed to know. This was her latest attempt to intimidate us, to scare us into giving up our home. "Look what we brought you," Lisa taunted, gesturing to the menacing crowd behind her. I felt Alex stiffen beside me, but I kept my cool. "This isn't going to work, Lisa. You can't bully us out of our own home." That's when the unexpected happened. The apparent leader of the group, a broad-shouldered guy with a commanding presence, stepped forward and burst out laughing. It wasn't the reaction any of us were expecting, least of all me. "Zoe, is that really you?" he exclaimed, his laughter subsiding into a wide grin. I squinted, taking in his features, a flicker of recognition igniting in my mind. Danny Coleman?" The rest of the group looked on in confusion as Danny nodded, still grinning. "In the flesh. Can't believe it's you, Riptide." The old nickname sent a shockwave through the crowd. I saw the change in their eyes, the way their posture shifted from hostile to respectful. Lisa and Mark were visibly taken aback, the confidence draining from their faces. Danny turned to the group, his voice loud and clear. "Folks, you might not know this, but Zoe here is a legend. We grew up in the same neighborhood, saw her fights. Trust me when I say, she's not someone you want to mess with." The murmurs of acknowledgement and nods of respect were almost surreal. Here I was, facing a potentially dangerous situation, and suddenly I had an advocate in the most unexpected form, a former classmate turned gang leader. Danny addressed Lisa and Mark directly, his tone serious. "You two got it all wrong. Trying to bully Zoe out of her house? That's not going to fly, not with me here." Lisa's voice was barely a whisper, her bravado gone. "But, this is supposed to be our house. We deserve it." Danny shook his head, the finality in his motion clear. "You don't deserve anything by terrorizing people, especially not someone like Zoe." He turned back to me, his expression softening. "Look, I know we've had our differences in the past, but no one messes with you. Not on my watch." As they left, with Lisa and Mark trailing behind, a defeated duo, the neighborhood's silence returned. But it was a different kind of quiet now, one filled with newfound respect and an unexpected sense of security. I closed the door, leaning back against it, the adrenaline slowly ebbing away. Alex wrapped his arms around me, a mix of shock and relief on his face. "I can't believe that just happened." I smiled, the tension finally releasing. "Neither can I. But I'm not complaining." We had faced down a threat with the most unlikely of outcomes. As I looked out the window at the retreating figures, I realized that sometimes, the past doesn't just haunt you, it comes back to lend a helping hand. And with that thought, I knew we were going to be okay. We had stood our ground, and we had won. After the standoff with Danny and his crew, things took a swift turn. The air around our little home was charged with a sense of change, a palpable shift in the winds that had been threatening our peace for so long. The first sign of this change came unexpectedly, just a few days later. I was out in the garden, tending to the roses that had started to bloom again, when I saw Lisa, her usual brashness replaced with a hunched, defeated posture. She was alone, without Mark or any of her so-called friends. She barely glanced my way as she made her way to her car, piled with boxes and bags. It was clear, she was leaving. The news spread quickly. Danny, the unexpected ally from my past, had made good on his word. He kicked Lisa out of the gang, severing her last ties to the community she'd tried to dominate. Without the backing of her tough friends, Lisa no longer felt safe or powerful in the city. Her departure was quiet, almost unnoticed, a stark contrast to the loud, defiant character she had always portrayed. Mark was next. He came by a few days after Lisa's departure, his car filled with the last of his belongings. He stopped by our house, a hesitant figure at the end of our driveway. I went out to meet him, curious about what he had to say. "Zoe," he started, avoiding my eyes. "I'm leaving too. Sold the apartment. It's time for a fresh start, somewhere far from here." His voice was soft, lacking the harsh, mocking tone I'd grown used to. I could see the toll the recent events had taken on him, the realization of his mistakes finally dawning on him. "Mark," I said, my tone neutral, "I hope you find what you're looking for. And I hope you learn from all this." He nodded, a small acknowledgement of the chaos he'd helped create. "I'm sorry, Zoe, for all the trouble. I was wrong." With that, he got into his car and drove away, leaving behind the neighborhood, the conflicts, and a trail of regrets. The street that had once felt like a battleground was quiet again, the tumultuous chapter of our lives coming to a close. Inside, Alex and I watched from the window, a sense of surreal relief washing over us. "They're gone," I said, almost in disbelief. "Just like that." Alex wrapped his arm around my shoulder, pulling me close. "It's over," he whispered. "We can start to move on now." As we looked out at the quiet street, the setting sun casting long shadows over the houses, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the unexpected turn of fate that had led us here. The day Lisa and Mark left, the neighborhood seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. It was as if the air itself was lighter, fresher, and filled with new possibilities. Alex and I found ourselves in a surreal kind of calm, the kind you only notice once the constant noise has gone. One evening, as we sat on our front porch, the last rays of the sun dipping below the horizon, I broke the comfortable silence between us. "Can you believe it's over?" I asked, my voice a mixture of wonder and relief. Alex looked over, a gentle smile playing on his lips. "Honestly, no. It feels like we've woken up from a bad dream." I chuckled, the sound more heartfelt than it had been in months. "A really bad dream. But, hey, we're awake now." With each passing day, the dark chapter of Lisa and Mark faded more into the background. Our home felt like a sanctuary again, a place filled with love and laughter, rather than tension and fear. I returned to my routine, finding solace in the simple tasks of gardening and reading, the library a haven of quiet stability. The simple pleasures of neighborhood life, once overshadowed by fear and conflict, now shone brightly. Evening walks, chats over the fence, the shared experiences of community life, they all took on a new significance. The path had been long and fraught with challenges, but we had emerged stronger, our bonds with each other and with our community deepened. The peace that now filled our home was not just the absence of conflict, but the presence of understanding, resilience, and love.